Throw your uppercut, try to hit me in the gut. Whispering my name, thinking I won't be the same. Turn fiction into fact. That'll never show, slipping on your every jack. So tighten up your fist, step into the ring with this. I hope your mama's got your back. First round, you thought you would've knocked me down. Fifth round, bleeding out the side of your mouth. Final round, aim in the crowd. You hit a bus. Oh, 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 oh. Bus. Oh, 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 oh. Just 'cause I took a break, you're making a huge mistake, thinking you can take the throne. Look at you trembling, step into the lion's den. Bet you wish you stayed at home. Begging for mercy underneath your breath when I ain't even sweating yet. My legend's written in the stone, yeah. You're crying danger in defeat is now your only friend. Even your mama's gotta know. First round, you thought you would've knocked me down. Fifth round, bleeding out the side of your mouth. Final round, only the sound of my name in the crowd. You hit a bus. Oh, 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 oh. You hit a bus. Oh, 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 First round, fifth round, final round.
Hey Nick, Sean Spicer. I understand there's some controversy brewing about how many subscribers you have on YouTube. You have more subscribers than anybody. Then it's probably the biggest, largest YouTube subscription that anybody's had. But also it's not numbers that matter, Nick. And I know everyone's gonna quibble over this, but it's content, it's quality, and your subscribers are amazing. They're great. They're high quality subscribers, and that's really what you have to look at. Don't just focus on the numbers. I mean, if people are spewing a bunch of fake news, just don't get in the mud. They're amazing folks. Their engagement, the way that they like the videos. Anyway, I hope this puts this to the end. I hope that this controversy is over, and we know who the real YouTube subscriber champ is, and it's you, Nick.
Hello, hello. Welcome, everyone, to In Time. With me today is Dr. Reverend Christopher 𝐂𝐚𝐥𝐥-𝐈𝐧 Dr. 𝐂𝐚𝐥𝐥, how are you? Yep, okay, I got no sound. I don't know if that's you or me there. Hold on, I can check and see if it's at least coming in. All of a sudden, today is just a technical problem after technical problem. This is what happens. You come back from vacation. So, give me a sec. No, I'm not getting any sound coming in from you, but,
not now.
Oh, there we are. There we are.
There we go.
All right. Doing good. How about yourself?
Doing well. No complaints. Well, I could complain, but who would listen?
Certainly not me. So, good to see you. And, well, that didn't take long. A nice shirt. Glad you dressed up for the occasion. So anyways, Tonight we are going to be covering what is purportedly going to be the, at least for now, the last of the hearings, hearing number 8. They've scheduled it in prime time for a couple of reasons, but ostensibly this is going to be the most explosive. Presumably what they're going to be focusing on is sort of the final element of this, Trump's refusal to act when he knew that there were armed people in the crowd, when he knew that he had that they were marching towards the Capitol, when he had been told that Eastman's plan was illegal, when Eastman himself had admitted that if his plan went before the U.S. Supreme Court, all 9 justices would strike it down. So given all of these facts, we're going to see what Trump said and did. It seems to me that also there's going to be a lot of corroboration of previous testimony. What are your thoughts on where we stand with this so far?
Well, if Kinzinger is to be believed, it doesn't seem like this is going to be the last of anything.
I have been disconnected from the news for the last 7 days. I've been in Sweden for most of the time. So what did Kinzinger?
For you.
Yeah, I actually
Kinzinger on the I think it was on the Sunday morning political rounds. He made it clear that hey, there may be more trials after this, and he just said it with such a casual ease that it was just like, yeah. Like he's hitting his stride, knowing that these are effective, knowing that these are blowing Trump's mind and scaring the people around Trump, right? I think he's just kind of, he knows that Trump watches TV. That's his main source of information. So both he and Liz Cheney, to my eye and ear, are just such deft communicators of just little drops of hints that we know a real lot. So, I mean, if they came, it would be great to just, corroborate the information we have, because we have so much, and we might have more trials beyond, this Thursday, because we just have so much information, so many new people coming to approach it. I mean, just the way he just was just so casual. We know that he was not only just talking to Trump, but that he was setting up tonight to have an audience of one, which is Merrick Garland. Right? At least that's how I'm looking at it.
I think you're onto something. That was not how I had been looking at it, but, sort of post hoc, based on what you said, that makes a lot of sense. I was kind of wondering why some of what they were saying they did the way they did. And when you realize that they're obviously aware that Trump has been watching, he has been tweeting or truth socialing or whatever the hell it's called over on his new media platform. He's been trying to comment on these things. It's crystal clear that he's been a very active listener in these things. We also know that Steve Bannon is facing his contempt of Congress trial, which these go to trial.
Talk about that.
Yeah.
That's just delicious. So many levels.
Yeah, well, yeah, it is. I think somebody pointed out that the likelihood that he is actually going to end up testifying gets dramatically reduced because this is going to be an appeals for so long. But I don't know that has anything to do with it. What are your thoughts on the trial? Looks like they're going to go to the jury maybe tomorrow.
Yeah, he has no defense. He's mounting no defense. So wait a second. I just want to be clear. You think that he's going to he's just doing this to get the verdict so that he can appeal it?
Oh, I do think that's true. I think he's going to appeal it. So what his defense, what he wanted to be was, hey, my lawyer told me it would be okay if I ignore this, and the judge seemed to intimate that was actually a defense that should be considered, but because of precedent, he can't consider it, so he threw that out. But he seemed to be setting up the ability for an appeal based on that, since historically people have been able to ignore these without consequence. It may be that he got good legal advice from the judge, and this from his lawyer, and this was just the exception. I don't think the committee cares about his testimony. I don't think they want his testimony. If they wanted it, they wouldn't be doing this, because this will be stuck in appeal forever. This will be at least 2 years.
Oh, no, they want to scapegoat him. They want to tell Trump that we can get this close.
Well, and they want other witnesses to realize we're serious and we're going to follow through with this. I think that's what that's the message they want to send, is if you don't want to testify, we'll go after you. And if they get the guilty verdict, which I think they probably I think it's almost guaranteed. Doesn't even matter if it's on appeal now. Everybody who's facing this is like, do you really want to go up against them on this? Now, he may win on appeal. Who knows? But do you think of victory?
As I understand it, prosecution had a mic drop moment yesterday where they played clips from his podcast where he's bragging about ignoring the subpoena. And he's pretty much explicitly saying he's going to ignore it. He's going to be non-compliant. So any story, any counter narrative that he thought it was flexible or he got bad advice from his lawyer, no, they have him saying explicitly in no uncertain terms what he's doing.
Well, and the
what he is at trial for. Why am I so loud?
I got no idea. What do you? Listen. What do you expect here? Competency? I got no idea. And the other defense, of course, that he's offering is executive privilege. But executive privilege usually applies to advisors and to lawyers directly around the president. He wasn't an advisor at this point. He was a podcaster that the president just happened to call and be chatting with.
Those arguments were thrown out by the judge. You can't use them.
Oh, it turned out he couldn't use. I knew he couldn't use a couple, though. I didn't realize that the executive privilege one was thrown out.
Oh yeah, as I understand it. Happy to be wrong, but that's how I understand it.
Well, like I said, I've been completely disconnected. Got back last night. Been bitching about the airport forever. Man,
How'd you make it back safe, man?
Yeah, but yeah, and then just a quick programming note. Xander and I are going to we're going to do off time. We haven't done off time in far too long. It's not going to be pre-recorded. It's just going to be Xander and I chatting about sort of where you stand on issues of sort of both conservative versus liberal interpretations of the Constitution, of trying to get things done. Where do you stand, even if you're a conservative who says, well, maybe there were better avenues for passing Roe v. Wade and gay marriage, and it shouldn't have been done the way it was done. Well, how do you feel about it being overturned? So we're going to be talking about sort of expeditious laws versus, quote, doing it the right way. So I think, Xander and I are going to have that talk, either tomorrow night or Saturday night for those of you who are interested. So that'll be off time. And then, I'm gonna go on the Discord and I'm gonna talk about. So yeah, I've been on vacation. I just got back. I've been out for 7 days. So there's a lot I gotta catch up on. Oh, thank you. Well, I'm glad you're here. So somebody who's been following the news during that time. And I was tempted, but I was like, no, wife aggro is a thing. So So
I'm so proud of you. I can't even stand it. Spit.
Oh, well, thank you. Oh, dear Lord. And yeah, your camera, somebody pointed out your image is frozen. I suspect that's actually on our end. That has happened on occasion with NDI. I don't know. I'll take a look at it and see if I can unfreeze it. I actually have an idea as to maybe how I could do that. Let me see if I can unfreeze it. No. I suspect that's on our end. I apologize. So I just the camera's frozen. It's not like I've been gone for a week and now technical problems out the friggin' wazoo. But okay.
While you're trying to work that out, let me just give some shout outs to people that are in the side chat. We see you. We know you're there, Titan. Pippa. Yes, this is 𝐒𝐤𝐬𝐺's revenge. He is his ghost. The ghost of 𝐒𝐤𝐬𝐺 is making my camera freeze. Because if he can't be here, no one can be here. Mike Westby, Paisano. How you feeling, brother? We got KCA Randy. Who else did I see? No Name. I saw you. You were here from the get-go. Goodman 4. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to hang with us. 18 of you. I'm impressed. This is where you get the good shit. Slash and Robin, what's up? CDN, Ollieman. This is great. People are just like random. It's like people know I'm giving them shout outs. Just like new people are coming in. I love it.
Well, it's sort of like, well, okay, Nick's going to be doing the news. You know, what else is new? Oh, Mouty's there. He's going to be giving shout out. That I'll go for. You know, end of Western civilization. Maybe not.
Yeah,
but
thanks to 𝐒𝐤𝐬𝐺, nobody fucking knows I'm here unless they're already tuned in because all they can do is hear me.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Well, we got to get your shield up, but we haven't. That's that's.
So gaming with Robin in about an hour from now. 9 o'clock is when they're supposed to start. 9 o'clock Eastern.
8 p.m. Eastern was last I heard, so they should be unless I got
was
something
that right?
wrong. Yeah, it's 8.
They should be starting any moment now.
They should be starting any moment. So yeah. And we'll see. I don't know. So, one of the things that I had mentioned earlier is that, now 2 Fox News anchors are really quite behind these hearings. Shep Smith, who's been a bit of a rogue. I find him, I don't know, but at least he seems to really be wanting to get to the truth of things.
Fox years ago, didn't he?
I don't think so. You know what? My brain is in neutral, but
Shep Smith hasn't been with Fox in a while.
I thought he was still really okay. Well, there you go. That shows who's the other one? There's somebody who's been recently.
Chris Wallace left. He's at CNN now.
That I knew. That I remembered. Okay. Oh, and Shep Smith is okay. Okay. You know what? I'll keep my. What is it? What's the line? Oh, now I can't even think of better to be silent and thought a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt.
That's a good one.
So, yeah, all right. Well, it looks like they are getting ready to start now. We have been struck on, I think, let's see, 5
Brett
out of
Baer.
6 of these.
KCA Randy says Brett Baer, I think.
Brett Baer, yep, Brett Baer. I think that's right. And Brett Baer is going to be out at Fox. Except Fox did that. Fox did that thing on the family with the trans. I think it was if I recall, it was a trans woman, and everybody was livid over that. But who knows? We'll talk about what's going on at Fox in a minute. Right now, it looks like they're getting ready to start. Shep Smith. Okay. Yep. Okay.
But the people at Fox are all on Dave Rubin's side, and then get livid when he decides to have a kid with his husband. So I mean, that's the Fox News crowd.
Yep. So, oh dear Lord, I was going to ask you another question, and I'm also jet lagged still. So there's
all good.
All right. Let's.
We got Liz Cheney. It's about to start. Let's go.
Good evening. Earlier this week, I received a positive COVID diagnosis. Per CDC guidelines, I've received the initial 2 shots and all of the boosters. Thus far, I've been blessed to experience very minimal symptoms. Because I'm still quarantined, I cannot participate in person with my colleagues. I've asked our Vice Chair, Ms. Cheney, to preside over this evening's hearing, including maintaining order in the room and swearing in our witnesses. Over the last month and a half, the Select Committee has told the story of a president who did everything in his power to overturn an election. He lied, he bullied, he betrayed his oath. He tried to destroy our democratic institutions. He summoned a mob to Washington. Afterward, on January 6th, when he knew that the assembled mob was heavily armed and angry, he commanded the mob to go to the Capitol, and he emphatically commanded the heavily armed mob to fight like hell. For the weeks between the November election and January 6th, Donald Trump was a force to be reckoned with. He shrugged off the factuality and legality correct, sober advice of his knowledgeable and sensible advisors. Instead, he recklessly blazed a path of lawlessness and corruption, the cost to which democracy be damned. And then he stopped. For 187 minutes on January 6th, this man of unbridled destructive energy could not be moved, not by his aides, not by his allies, not by the violent chants of rioters or the desperate pleas of those facing down the riot. And more tellingly, Donald Trump ignored and disregarded the desperate pleas of his own family, including Ivanka and Don Jr. Even though he was the only person in the world who could call off the mob he sent to the Capitol, he could not be moved to rise from his dining room table and walk the few steps down the White House hallway into the press briefing room where cameras were anxiously and desperately waiting to carry his message to the armed and violent mob, savagely beating and killing law enforcement officers, revenging the Capitol, and hunting down the Vice President and various members of Congress. He could not be moved. This evening, my colleagues, Mr. 𝐂𝐚𝐥𝐥 of Illinois and Ms. Luria of Virginia, will take you inside the White House during those 187 minutes. We also remind you of what was happening at the Capitol minute by minute as the final violent, tragic part of Donald Trump's scheme to cling to power unraveled while he ignored his advisors, stood by and watched it unfold on television. Let me offer a final thought about the Select Committee's work so far. As we've made clear throughout these hearings, our investigation goes forward. We continue to receive new information every day. We continue to hear from witnesses. We will reconvene in September to continue laying out our findings to the American people. But as that work goes forward, a number of facts are clear. There can be no doubt that there was a coordinated, multi-step effort to overturn an election overseen and directed by Donald Trump. There can be no doubt that he commanded a mob he knew was heavily armed, violent, and angry, to march on the Capitol to try to stop the peaceful transfer of power. And he made targets out of his own vice president and the lawmakers gathered to do the people's work. These facts have gone undisputed. And so there needs to be accountability. Accountability under the law. Accountability to the American people. Accountability at every level, from the local precincts in many states where Donald Trump and his allies attacked election workers for just doing their jobs, all the way up to the Oval Office, where Donald Trump embraced the legal advice of insurrectionists that a federal judge has already said was a coup in search of a legal theory. Our democracy withstood the attack on January 6th. If there's no accountability, for January 6th, for every part of this scheme, I fear that we will not overcome the ongoing threat to our democracy. There must be stiff consequences for those responsible. Now I'll turn things
The presiding officer is authorized to declare the committee in recess at any point. Pursuant to House Deposition Authority Regulation 10, I announce that the committee has approved the release of the deposition material presented during today's hearing. And let me begin tonight by wishing Chairman Thompson a rapid recovery from COVID. He has expertly led us through 8 hearings so far, and he has brought us to the point we are today. In our initial hearing, the chairman and I described what ultimately became Donald Trump's 7-part plan to overturn the 2020 presidential election, a plan stretching from before Election Day through January 6th. At the close of today's hearing, our 9th, we will have addressed each element of that plan. But in the course of these hearings, we have received new evidence, and new witnesses have bravely stepped forward. Efforts to litigate and overcome immunity and executive privilege claims have been successful, and those continue. Doors have opened, new subpoenas have been issued, and the dam has begun to break. And now, even as we conduct our 9th hearing, we have considerably more to do. We have far more evidence to share with the American people and more to gather. So our committee will spend August pursuing emerging information on multiple fronts before convening further hearings this September. Today, we know far more about the president's plans and actions to overturn the election than almost all members of Congress did when President Trump was impeached on January 13th, 2021, or when he was tried by the Senate in February of that year. 57 of 100 senators voted to convict President Trump at that time, and more than 20 others said they were voting against conviction because the president's term had already expired. At the time, the Republican leader of the United States Senate said this about Donald Trump.
A mob was assaulting the Capitol in his name. These criminals were carrying his banners, hanging his flags, and screaming their loyalty to him. It was obvious that only President Trump could end this. He was the only one.
Leader McConnell reached those conclusions based on what he knew then, without any of the much more detailed evidence you will see today. Lawlessness and violence began at the Capitol on January 6, 2021, before 1 p.m., and continued until well after darkness fell. What exactly was our Commander-in-Chief doing during the hours of violence? Today, we address precisely that issue. Everything you've heard in these hearings thus far will help you understand President Trump's motives during the violence. You already know Donald Trump's goal: to halt or delay Congress's official proceedings to count certified electoral votes. You know that Donald Trump tried to pressure his vice president to illegally reject votes and delay the proceedings. You know he tried to convince state officials and state legislators to flip their electoral votes from Biden to Trump. And you know Donald Trump tried to corrupt our Department of Justice to aid his scheme. But by January 6th, none of that had worked. Only one thing was succeeding on the afternoon of January 6th. Only one thing was achieving President Trump's goal. The angry, armed mob President Trump sent to the Capitol broke through security, invaded the Capitol, and forced the vote counting to stop. That mob was violent and destructive, and many came armed. As you will hear, Secret Service agents protecting the vice president were exceptionally concerned about his safety and their own. Republican leader Kevin McCarthy was scared. as were others in Congress, even those who themselves helped to provoke the violence. And as you will see today, Donald Trump's own White House counsel, his own White House staff, members of his own family, all implored him to immediately intervene to condemn the violence and instruct his supporters to stand down, leave the Capitol, and disperse. For multiple hours, he would not. Donald Trump would not get on the phone and order the military or law enforcement agencies to help. And for hours, Donald Trump chose not to answer the pleas from Congress, from his own party, and from all across our nation to do what his oath required. He refused to defend our nation and our Constitution. He refused to do what every American president must. In the days after January 6th, almost no one of any political party would defend President Trump's conduct, and no one should do so today. Thank you, and I now recognize the gentlewoman from Virginia.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Article 2 of our Constitution requires that the President swear a very specific oath every 4 years. Every President swears or affirms to faithfully execute the office of President of the United States. The President also assumes the constitutional duty to take care that our nation's laws be faithfully executed, and is the Commander-in-Chief of our military. Our hearings have shown the many ways in which President Trump tried to stop the peaceful transfer of power in the days leading up to January 6th. With each step of his plan, he betrayed his oath of office and was derelict in his duty. Tonight, we will further examine President Trump's actions on the day of the attack on the Capitol. Early that afternoon, President Trump instructed tens of thousands of supporters at and near the ellipse rally, a number of whom he knew were armed with various types of weapons, to march to the Capitol. After telling the crowd to march multiple times, he promised he would be with them and finished his remarks at 1:10 p.m. like this.
We're going to walk down, and I'll be there with you. We're going to walk down. We're going to walk down anyone you want, but I think right here we're going to walk down to the Capitol. So let's walk down Pennsylvania Avenue.
By this time, the Vice President was in the Capitol. The joint session of Congress to certify Joe Biden's victory was underway, and the Proud Boys and other rioters had stormed through the first barriers and begun the attack. Radio communications from law enforcement informed Secret Service and those in the White House Situation Room of these developments in real time. At the direction of President Trump, thousands more rioters marched from the ellipse to the Capitol, and they joined the attack. As you will see in great detail tonight, President Trump was being advised by nearly everyone to immediately instruct his supporters to leave the Capitol, disperse, and halt the violence. Virtually everyone told President Trump to condemn the violence in clear and unmistakable terms. And those on Capitol Hill and across the nation begged President Trump to help. But the former president chose not to do what all of those people begged. He refused to tell the mob to leave until 4:17, when he tweeted out a video statement filmed in the Rose Garden, ending with this.
So go home. We love you. You're very special. You've seen what happens. You see the way others are treated that are so bad and so evil. I know how you feel. But go home and go home in peace.
By that time, 2 pipe bombs had been found at locations near the Capitol, including where the Vice President-elect was conducting a meeting. Hours of hand-to-hand combat had seriously injured scores of law enforcement officers. The Capitol had been invaded, the electoral count had been halted as members were evacuated. Rioters took the floor of the Senate. They rifled through desks and broke into offices, and they nearly caught up to Vice President Pence. Guns were drawn on the House floor, and a rioter was shot attempting to infiltrate the chamber. We know that a number of rioters intended acts of physical violence against specific elected officials. We know virtually all the rioters were motivated by President Trump's rhetoric that the election had been stolen, and they felt they needed to take their country back. This hearing is principally about what happened inside of the White House that afternoon. From the time when President Trump ended his speech until the moment when he finally told the mob to go home, a span of 187 minutes, more than 3 hours. What you will learn is that President Trump sat in his dining room and watched the attack on television, while his senior-most staff, closest advisors, and family members begged him to do what is expected of any American president. I served proudly for 20 years as an officer in the United States Navy. Veterans of our armed forces know firsthand
it's definitely worth remembering.
The leadership that's required in a time of crisis, urgent and decisive action that puts duty and country first. But on January 6th, when lives and our democracy hung in the balance, President Trump refused to act because of his selfish desire to stay in power. And I yield to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Kinzinger.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Luria. 1 week after the attack, Republican leader Kevin McCarthy acknowledged the simple truth. President Trump should have acted immediately to stop the violence. During our investigation, General Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, also remarked on the president's failure to act. Let's hear what they had to say.
The president bears responsibility for Wednesday's attack on Congress by mob rioters. He should have immediately denounced the mob when he saw what was unfolding. These facts require immediate action by President Trump.
Yeah, the Commander-in-Chief, you got an assault going on the Capitol of the United States of America. And there's nothing. No call, nothing, zero.
Like my colleague from Virginia, I'm a veteran. I served in the Air Force, and I serve currently in the Air National Guard. I can tell you that General Milley's reaction to President Trump's conduct is 100% correct, and so was Leader McCarthy's. What explains President Trump's behavior? Why did he not take immediate action in a time of crisis? Because President Trump's plan for January 6th was to halt or delay Congress's official proceeding to count the votes. The mob attacked the Capitol the mob attacking the Capitol quickly caused the evacuation of both the House and the Senate. The count ground to an absolute halt and was ultimately delayed for hours. The mob was accomplishing President Trump's purpose, so of course he didn't intervene. Here's what will be clear by the end of this hearing. President Trump did not fail to act during the 187 minutes between leaving the ellipse and telling the mob to go home. He chose not to act. But there were hundreds that day who honored their oaths and put their lives on the line to protect the people inside the Capitol and to safeguard our democracy. Many of them are here tonight with us, and many more are watching from home. As you already know, and we'll see again tonight, their service and sacrifice shines a bright light on President Trump's dishonor and dereliction of duty. I yield to the Vice Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kinzinger. I'd like to begin by welcoming our witnesses this evening. Tonight we're joined by Mr. Matthew Pottinger. Mr. Pottinger is a decorated former Marine intelligence officer who served this nation on tours of duty in Afghanistan and Iraq. He served in the Trump White House from the first day of the administration through the early morning hours of January 7th, 2021. The last role in which he served in the White House was as Deputy National Security Advisor to the President of the United States. We're also joined by Sarah Matthews. Ms. Matthews started her career in communications, working on Capitol Hill, serving on the Republican staffs of several House committees. She then worked as Deputy Press Secretary for President Trump's re-election campaign before joining the Trump White House in June of 2020. She served there as Deputy Press Secretary and Special Assistant to the President until the evening of January 6th, 2021. I will now swear in our witnesses. The witnesses will please stand and raise their right hands.
All right. So, as it has been the case so far, we're looking at high-level members of the Trump campaign, often appointed by Trump himself, and in this case, they're focusing on the military.
And for being here tonight, Mr. Pottinger, thank you for your service to the nation, as well as for joining us this evening. Can you please briefly explain what your responsibilities were as Deputy National Security Advisor to the President?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. When I started at the White House, I was a Senior Director for Asia on the National Security Council staff, so that was a job that involved helping coordinate the President's Asia policy. I supported the President when he met or interacted with Asian leaders. Later, 2019, I was promoted to the job of Deputy National Security Advisor. In that role, I was the chairman of the Deputies Committee. That's an NSC meeting of all of the deputy cabinet secretaries. We would settle important matters of national policy related to our national security, and we would also tee up options for the President and for his cabinet members. It was, I felt then, as I do now, that it was a privilege to serve in the White House. I'm also very proud of President Trump's foreign policy accomplishments. We were able to finally compete with China. We were also able to broker peace agreements between Israel and 3 Arab states. I mean, those are some examples of the types of policies that I think made our country safer.
Thank you, Ms. Pottinger. And were you in the White House during the attack on the Capitol on January 6th?
For most of the day, I was in the White House, although when the President was speaking at the rally, I was actually off-site at a scheduled meeting with India's ambassador to the United States. The National Security Council staff was not involved in organizing the security for what was a domestic event, the rally. But I did return to the White House at roughly 2:30 p.m.
Thank you, and I know my colleagues will have additional questions for you about that afternoon. Let me turn now to you, Ms. Matthews. How did you come to join President Trump's White House staff?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. As you outlined, I am a lifelong Republican, and I joined the Trump re-election campaign in June of 2019. I was one of the first communications staffers actually on board for his re-election campaign. And during that time, I met Kayleigh McEnany, who was also working on his.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I worked there for a year, and I formed a close relationship with Ms. McEnany, and she moved over to the White House in April of 2020 to start as White House press secretary, and she brought over a group of campaign staff with her, and so I joined her over at the White House in June of 2020 to start as her deputy.
And were you, Ms. Matthews, at work in the White House on January 6th?
Yes, I was working out of the West Wing that day.
Thank you. And now I'd like to recognize the gentlewoman from Virginia and the gentleman from Illinois.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. As you've seen in our prior hearings, President Trump summoned the mob to D.C. on January 6th. Before he went on stage, he knew some of them were armed and prepared for combat. During his speech, he implored them to march to the Capitol, as he had always planned to do. By the time he walked off the stage, his supporters had already breached the outer perimeter of the Capitol at the foot of Capitol Hill. Since our last hearings, we've received new testimony from a security professional working in the White House complex on January 6th, with access to relevant information and responsibility to report to national security officials. This security official told us that the White House was aware of multiple reports of weapons in the crowd that morning. We as a committee are cognizant of the fear of retribution expressed by certain national security witnesses who have come forward to tell the truth. We've therefore taken steps to protect this national security individual's identity. Listen to this clip from their testimony.
What was the consistent message from the people about this idea of the president to walk to the Capitol?
To be completely honest, we were all in a state of shock.
Because why?
Because it's just, one, I think the actual physical feasibility of doing it, and then also we all knew what that implicated and what that meant. That this was no longer a rally, that this was going to move to something else if he physically walked to the Capitol. I don't know if you want to use the word insurrection, coup, whatever. We all knew that this would move from a normal, democratic, public event into something else.
What was driving that sentiment, considering this part of it, the actual breach of the Capitol, hadn't happened yet?
Why were we alarmed?
Right.
The president wanted to lead tens of thousands of people to the Capitol. I think that was enough grounds for us to be alarmed.
To go to the Capitol when he got off the stage at the Ellipse. But his Secret Service detail was equally determined to not let him go. That led to a heated argument with the detail that delayed the departure of the motorcade to the White House. We have evidence from multiple sources regarding an angry exchange in the presidential SUV, including testimony we will disclose today from two witnesses who confirmed that a confrontation occurred. The first witness is a former White House employee with national security responsibilities. After seeing the initial violence at the Capitol on TV, the individual went to see Tony Ornato, the Deputy Chief of Staff in his office. Mr. Ornato was there with Bobby Engel, the president's lead Secret Service agent. This employee told us that Mr. Ornato said that the president was, quote, irate when Mr. Engel refused to drive him to the Capitol. Mr. Engel did not refute what Mr. Ornato said. The second witness is retired Sergeant Mark Robinson of the DC Police Department, who was assigned to the president's motorcade that day. He sat in the lead vehicle with a Secret Service agent responsible for the motorcade, also called the TS agent. Here's how Sergeant Robinson remembered the exchange.
Was there any description of what was occurring in the car?
No, the only description I received was that the president was upset and that he was adamant about going to the Capitol, and there was a heated discussion about that.
And when you say heated, is that your word or is that the word that was described by the TS agent?
No, the word described by the TS agent, meaning that the president was upset, and he was saying there was a heated argument or discussion about going to the Capitol.
About how many times would you say you've been part of that motorcade with the president?
Probably over 100 times.
And in that 100 times, have you ever witnessed another discussion of an argument or heated discussion with the president where the president was contradicting where he was supposed to go or what the Secret Service believed was safe?
No.
Like other witnesses, Sergeant Robinson also testified that he was aware that individuals in the crowd were armed.
Yes, I believe he was on special events channel, and I was monitoring the traffic, and so I could hear some of the units pointing out to individuals that there were individuals along Constitution Avenue that were armed, that were up in the trees, and I can hear the units responding to those individuals. And so there's always a concern when there's a protest in the area.
And like other witnesses, Sergeant Robinson told us that the president still wanted to travel to the Capitol, even after returning to the White House.
So at the end of the speech, what was the plan supposed to be?
So at the end of the speech, we do know that while inside the limo, the president was still adamant about going to the Capitol. That's being relayed to me by the TS agent. And so we did part the ellipse and we responded back to the White House. However, the motorcade, the protest motorcade was placed on standby. And so we were told to stand by on West Exec until they confirm whether or not the president was going to go to the Capitol. And so I may have waited, I would just estimate maybe 45 minutes to an hour, waiting for Secret Service to make that decision.
The motorcade waited at the White House for more than 45 minutes before being released. The committee is also aware that accounts of the angry confrontation in the presidential SUV have circulated widely among the Secret Service since January 6th. Recent disclosures have also caused the committee to subpoena yet further information from the Secret Service, which we've begun to receive and will continue to assess. The committee is also aware that certain Secret Service witnesses have now retained new private counsel. We anticipate further testimony under oath and other new information in the coming weeks. After the Secret Service refused to take President Trump to the Capitol, he returned to the White House. What you see on the screen is a photo of him inside the Oval Office immediately after he returned from the rally, still wearing his overcoat. A White House employee informed the president as soon as he returned to the Oval about the riot at the Capitol. Let me repeat that. Within 15 minutes of leaving the stage, President Trump knew that the Capitol was besieged and under attack. At 1:25, President Trump went to the private dining room off the Oval Office. From 1:25 until 4 o'clock, the president stayed in his dining room. Just to give you a sense of where the dining room is situated in the West Wing, let's take a look at this floor plan. The dining room is connected to the Oval Office by a short hallway. Witnesses told us that on January 6th, President Trump sat in his usual spot, at the head of the table, facing a television hanging on the wall. We know from the employee that the TV was tuned to Fox News all afternoon. Here you can see Fox News on the TV showing coverage of the joint session that was airing that day at 1:25. Other witnesses confirmed record of what President Trump did while in the dining room. On the screen is the presidential call log from January 6th. As you can see, there's no official record of President Trump receiving or placing a call between 11:06 and 6:54 p.m. As to what the president was doing that afternoon, the presidential daily diary is also silent. It contains no information from the period between 1:21 p.m. and 4:03 p.m. There are also no photos of President Trump during this critical period between 1:21 in the Oval Office and when he went outside to the Rose Garden after 4 o'clock. The chief White House photographer wanted to take pictures because it was, in her words, very important for his archives and for history. But she was told, quote, no photographs. Despite the lack of photos or an official record, we've learned what President Trump was doing while he was watching TV in the dining room. But before we get into that, it's important to understand what he never did that day. Let's watch.
So are you aware of any phone call by the President of the United States to the Secretary of Defense that day?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Are you aware of any phone call by the President of the United States to the Attorney General of the United States that day?
No.
Are you aware of any phone call by the President of the United States to the Secretary of Homeland Security that day?
I'm not aware of that, no.
Did you ever hear the President
No.
ask for the National Guard? Did you ever hear the President ask for law enforcement response?
No.
So as somebody who works in the national security space and with the National Security Council, if there were going to be troops present or called up for a rally in Washington, D.C., for example, is that something that you would have been aware of?
Yeah, I would have.
Do you know if he asked anybody to reach out to any of those that we just listed off? National Guard, DOD, FBI, Homeland Security, Secret Service, Mayor Bowser, the Capitol Police, about the situation at the Capitol?
I am not aware of any of those requests. No, sir.
We have confirmed in numerous interviews with senior law enforcement and military leaders, Vice President Pence's staff and D.C. government officials. None of them, not one, heard from President Trump that day. He did not call to issue orders. He did not call to offer assistance. This week, we received additional testimony from yet another witness about why the president didn't make any efforts to quell the attack. The former White House employee with national security responsibilities told us about a conversation with senior advisor Eric Hirschman and Pat Cipollone, the top White House lawyer. This conversation was about a pending call from the Pentagon seeking to coordinate.
Just want to pause 1 minute. Welcome 𝐓𝐢𝐬𝐻𝑒𝐸 he's been here listening for a while, but we didn't want to interrupt. But I do want to say, well, somebody said this, I think possibly jokingly, what's the possibility that this is Jared? Any thoughts, 𝐬𝐸𝐬𝐻𝑒𝐸𝐸 𝐓𝐢𝐬𝐬𝐻𝑒𝐸𝐸 what's the possibility that this is Jared? Yeah, I'm wondering if this is actually Jared Kushner, and they're but just a thought
On the response to the attack. Mr. Hirschman turned to Mr. Cipollone and said, the president didn't want to do anything. And so Mr. Cipollone had to take the call himself. So if President Trump wasn't calling law enforcement or military leaders, what did President Trump spend his time doing that afternoon while he first settled into the dining room? He was calling senators to encourage them to delay or object to the certification. Here's Kayleigh McEnany, his press secretary, to explain.
Okay. All right, then it says back there, and he wants list of senators. And then he's calling them one by one. Do you know which ones he called?
To the best of my recollection, no. As I say in my notes, he wanted a list of the senators, and I left him at that point.
Because the presidential call log is empty, we do not yet know precisely which senators President Trump was calling. But we do know from Rudy Giuliani's phone records that President Trump also called him at 1:39, after he had been told that the riot was underway at the Capitol. Mr. Giuliani was President Trump's lead election attorney. According to the phone records, the president's call with him lasted approximately 4 minutes. Recall that Fox News was on in the dining room. Let's take a look at what was airing as this call was ending.
The president, as we all saw, fired this crowd up. They've all, tens of thousands, maybe 100,000 or more, have gone down to the Capitol or elsewhere in the city, and they're very upset. Now, I jumped down as soon as we heard the news that Brett gave you about Mike Pence. I started talking to these people. I said, what do you think? One woman, an Air Force veteran from Missouri, said she was, quote, disgusted to hear that news and that it was his duty to do something. And I told her, I said, there's nothing in the Constitution unilaterally that Vice President Pence could do. She said, that doesn't matter. He should have fought for Trump.
At 1:49, here's what was happening at the Capitol with President Trump's fired up supporters.
We're going to give riot warning. We're going to try and get compliance, but this is now effectively a riot.
1349 hours declaring it a riot.
What did President Trump do at 1:49 as the DC police at the same time were declaring a riot at the Capitol? As you can see on the screen, he tweeted out a link to the recording of his ellipse speech. This was the same speech in which he knowingly sent an armed mob to the Capitol, but President Trump made no comment about the lawlessness and the violence. I yield to the gentleman from Illinois.
The next action President Trump took was to tweet at 2:24 p.m. What happened during the 35 minutes between his last tweet at 1:49 and 2:24? His staff repeatedly came into the room to see him and plead that he make a strong public statement condemning the violence and instructing the mob to leave the Capitol. He did not relent until after 4 o'clock when he went out to go to the Rose Garden to film his now message. Pat Cipollone was a top White House lawyer. Here's what he told us about his reaction to seeing the violence and his advice throughout the afternoon.
When did you first realize that there was actually
violence or rioting.
I first realized that it may have been on television, or it may have been Tony, or it may have been Bill, but I found out that people were, they weren't in the Capitol yet, but they were, and then I started watching it, and then I was aware.
What specifically did you think needed to be done?
I think I was pretty clear there needed to be an immediate and forceful response statement, public statement that people need to leave the Capitol now.
My question is exactly that. That it sounds like you, from the very onset of violence at the Capitol, right around 2:00, were pushing for a strong statement that people should leave the Capitol. Is that right?
I was, and others were as well. Okay.
Pat, you said that you expressed your opinion forcefully. Could you tell us exactly how you did that?
Yeah, I can't. Don't have. I have to. On the privilege issue, I can't talk about conversations with the president, but I can generically say that I said, people need to be told. There needs to be a public announcement fast that they need to leave the Capitol.
And Pat, could you let us know approximately when you said that?
Approximately when? Almost immediately after I found out people were getting into the Capitol or approaching the Capitol in a way that was violent.
Do you remember any discussion with Mark Meadows with respect to his view that the president didn't want to do anything, was somehow resistant to wanting to say something along the lines that you suggest?
It's not just to be clear, many people suggested it. Not just me. Many people felt the same way. I'm sure I had conversations with Mark about this during the course of the day and expressed my opinion very forcefully that this needs to be done.
So your advice was tell people to leave the Capitol, and it took over 2 hours when there were subsequent statements made, tweets put forth that in your view were insufficient. Did you continue, Mr. Cipollone, throughout the period of time up until 4/17, continue, you and others, to push for a stronger statement?
Yes.
Were you joined in that effort by Ivanka?
White House Counsel's Office wanted there to be a strong statement out to condemn the rioters. I'm confident in that. I'm confident that Ivanka Trump wanted there to be a strong statement to condemn the rioters. I don't know the private conversation she had with Mr. Trump, but I remember when she came to the office one time with White House Counsel's Office, when she came to the Chief of Staff's office with White House Counsel's Office, she was talking about the speech later that day and trying to get her dad on board with saying something that was more direct than he had wanted to at the time and throughout the afternoon.
And I think Mark also I remember him getting Ivanka involved because it's like, get Ivanka down here because he thought that would be important. I don't think Jared was there in the morning, but I think he came later. I remember thinking it was important to get him in there too. And of course, Pat Philbin, was expressing the same things. I mean, Pat Philbin, was very, as I said, I don't think there was one of these meetings where there might have been, but for the most part, I remember that both of us going down together, going back, getting on phone calls. He was also very clearly expressing this view.
Pat Cipollone and Cassidy Hutchinson, an aide to Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, also told us about the Hang Mike Pence chants. As you will see, Mr. Cipollone recalled conversations about those chants in the West Wing, but he relied on executive privilege to maintain confidentiality over his and others' direct communications with the president. Although Mr. Cipollone was unwilling to provide more detail, Ms. Hutchison provided more explicit information, filling in those blanks. See that for yourself.
It wasn't until Mark hung up the phone, handed it back to me. I went back to my desk. A couple minutes later, him and Pat came back, possibly Eric Hirschman too. I'm pretty sure Eric Hirschman was there. But I'm confident it was Pat that was there. I remember Pat saying something to the effect of, Mark, we need to do something more. They're literally calling for the vice president to be effing hung. And Mark had responded something to the effect of, you heard him, Pat. He thinks Mike deserves it. He doesn't think they're doing anything wrong. To which Pat said something, this is effing crazy. We need to be doing something more. Briefly stepped into Mark's office.
Do you remember any discussion at any point during the day about rioters at the Capitol chanting, "Hang Mike Pence"?
Yes, I remember hearing that about that. Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know if I observed that myself on TV.
I'm just curious. I understand the privilege line you've drawn, but do you remember what you can share with us about the discussion about those chants, the "Hang Mike Pence" chants?
I can tell you my view of that.
Yeah, please.
My view of that is outrageous. And for anyone to suggest such a thing as the Vice President of the United States, for people in that crowd to be chanting that, I thought it was terrible. I thought it was outrageous and wrong. And I expressed that very clearly.
With respect to your conversations with Mr. Meadows, though, did you specifically raise a concern over the Vice President with him, and how did he respond?
I believe I raised a concern about the Vice President, and I again, the nature of his response, without recalling exactly, was people were doing all that they could.
And what about the President? Did he indicate whether he thought the President was doing what needed to be done to protect the Vice President?
Get to sir. That question.
Call for production. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm being instructed on it.
I see.
In addition, Mr. Cipollone testified that it would have been feasible, as commentators on television were suggesting, for President Trump to immediately appear at the podium in the press room to address the nation.
Would it have been possible at any moment for the president to walk down to the podium in the briefing room and talk to the nation at any time between when you first gave him that advice at 2 o'clock and 4:17 when the video statement? Would that have been possible?
Would it have been possible?
Yes.
Yes, it would have been possible.
We just heard Mr. Cipollone say that President Trump could have gone to the press briefing room to issue a statement at any moment. To give you a sense of just how easy that would have been, let's take a look at a map of the West Wing. As we saw earlier, the president's private dining room is at the bottom of the map. The press briefing room is at the top, highlighted in blue. And the Rose Garden, where the president ultimately filmed his Go Home video, is on the right next to the Oval Office, and that's highlighted in green. Ms. Matthews, how quickly could the president have gotten on camera in the press briefing room to deliver a statement to the nation?
So as you outlined, it would take probably less than 60 seconds from the Oval Office dining room over to the press briefing room. And for folks that might not know, the briefing room is the room that you see the White House press secretary do briefings from, with the podium and the blue backdrop. And there's a camera that is on in there at all times. And so if the president had wanted to make a statement and address the American people, he could have been on camera almost instantly. And conversely, the White House press corps has offices that are located directly behind the briefing room. And so if he had wanted to make an address from the Oval Office, we could have assembled the White House press corps probably in a matter of minutes to get them into the Oval for him to do an on-camera address.
Thank you. Other witnesses have given us their views on that question. For example, General Keith Kellogg told us that some staff were concerned that a live appearance by the president at the microphones at that moment could actually make matters worse. He told us he recommended against doing a press conference because during his 4 years in the Trump administration, quote, there wasn't a single clean press conference we had had. President Trump's advisors knew his state of mind at that moment, and they were worried about what he would say in unscripted comments. I yield to the gentlewoman from Virginia.
Thank you. As you've heard By 2 o'clock, multiple staff members in the White House recognized that a serious situation was underway at the Capitol. Personally, I recall being evacuated from the House office building where we're sitting before this time. It was due to the discovery of 2 pipe bombs in nearby buildings. Ms. Matthews, around the same time, you were watching the violence unfold on television and social media with colleagues, including with Ben Williamson, a senior aide to Mark Meadows and the acting director of communications. You told us that before President Trump sent his next tweet at 2:24, Mr. Williamson got up to go see Mr. Meadows, and you got up to go see Kayleigh McEnany. Why did you both do that?
So Ben and I were watching the coverage unfold from one of the offices in the West Wing, and we both recognized that the situation was escalating, and it was escalating quickly, and that the president needed to be out there immediately to tell these people to go home and condemn the violence that we were seeing. So I told him that I was going to make that recommendation to Kayleigh, and he said he was going to make the same recommendation to the Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows.
Thank you. And one of your colleagues in the press office, Judd Deere, told us he also went to see Ms. McEnany at that time. Let's hear what he said about this critical period of time, right as the rioters were getting into the Capitol.
And why did you think it was necessary to say something?
Well, I mean, it appears that individuals are storming the U.S. Capitol building. They also appear to be supporters of Donald Trump who may have been in attendance at the rally. We're going to need to say something.
And did you have a view as to what should be said by the White House?
If I recall, I told Kayleigh that I thought that we needed to encourage individuals to stop, to respect law enforcement, and to go home.
Although President Trump was aware of the ongoing riot, he did not take any immediate action to address the lawlessness. Instead, at 2:03, he called Rudy Giuliani again, and that call lasted for over 8 minutes. Moments later, at 2:13, rioters broke into the Capitol itself. One of the Proud Boys charged with seditious conspiracy, Dominic Pezzola, used an officer's shield to...
I'm going to interrupt for 1 minute. I'd like to also add that and we don't have any records of any of these calls. So there's none of the White House logs what the president does minute by minute. This is logged. It's also logged all the calls he receives. We have no logs from this time. The reason we know this is the reason we know these calls were actually made is because they subpoenaed Giuliani's records, and so we know inbound that he got these calls from the president. We know how long they lasted, but outbound, the records that are supposed to be there aren't. Absolutely extraordinary situation in that regard.
To smash a window, and rioters flooded into the building. As rioters were entering the building, the Secret Service held Vice President Pence in his office right off the Senate chamber for 13 minutes as they worked to clear a safe path to a secure location. Now listen to some of that radio traffic and see what they were seeing as the protesters got just feet away from where the Vice President was holding.
Hold! They can't get the building! Hold!
Open that door up. If we're moving, we need to move now.
Copy.
If we lose any more time, we may lose the ability to leave. So if we're going to leave, we need to do it now.
They've gained access to the second floor, and I've got public about 5 feet from me down here below.
Okay, copy. They are on the second floor. moving in now, we may want to consider getting out and leaving now. Copy?
Will we encounter the people once we make our way?
Repeat?
Encounter any individuals if we made our way to the
There's 6 officers between us and the people that are 5 to 10 feet away from me.
Stand by, I'm going down to evaluate.
Go ahead.
We have a clear shot if we move quickly. We got smoke downstairs set by unknown smoke set downstairs by the protesters.
Is that route compromised?
We have this is secure. However, we will bypass some protesters that are being contained. There is smoke, unknown what kind of smoke it is. Copy?
Clear, we're coming out now, all right? Make a way.
The President's National Security Council staff was listening to these developments and tracking them in real time. On the screen, you can see excerpts from the chat logs among the President's National Security Council staff. At 2:13, the staff learned that the rioters were kicking in the windows at the Capitol. 3 minutes later, the staff said the Vice President was being pulled, which meant agents evacuated him from the Senate floor. At 2:24, the staff noted that the Secret Service agents at the Capitol did not, quote, sound good right now. Earlier, you heard from a security professional who had been working in the White House complex on January 6th, with access to relevant information and a responsibility to report to national security officials. We asked this person, what was meant by the comment that the Secret Service agents did not, quote, sound good right now? In the following clip of that testimony, which has been modified to protect the individual's identity, the professional discusses what they heard from listening to the incoming radio traffic that day.
Okay, that last entry in this page of service, the Capitol does not sound good right now.
Correct.
What does that mean?
The members of the VP detail at this time were starting to fear for their own lives. There was a lot of yelling, a lot of very personal calls over the radio. So it was disturbing. I don't like talking about it, but there were calls to say goodbye to family members, so on and so forth. It was getting, for whatever the reason was on the ground, the VP detail thought that this was about to get very ugly.
And did you hear that over the radio? Okay. What was the response by the Secret Service agents who were there?
Everybody kept saying, at that point it was just reassurances, or I think there were discussions of reinforcements coming, but again, it was just chaos. They were just yelling.
Obviously, you conveyed the disturbing, but what prompted you to put it into an entry, as it states there, service to the Capitol?
They're running out of options, and they're getting nervous. It sounds like that we came very close to either service having to use lethal options or worse. Like at that point, I don't know. Is the VP compromised? Is the detail I don't know. Like we didn't have visibility, but it doesn't. If they're screaming and saying things like "say goodbye to the family," like the floor needs to know this is going to a whole nother level soon.
As this next video shows, the rioters' anger was focused primarily on Vice President Mike Pence.
This woman comes up to the side of us and she says, Pence folded. So it was kind of like, okay, well, in my mind, I was thinking, well, that's it, Well, my son-in-law looks at me and he says, I want to go in.
What percentage of the crowd is going to the Capitol?
100%. It is spread like wildfire that Pence has betrayed us and everybody's marching on the Capitol, all 1 million of us. It's insane.
What happened? I keep hearing that Mike Pence has screwed us. That's the word. I keep
people appear angry as you were walking to the Capitol?
Yeah, a lot of people seem like they're very upset.
Tell us some of the things they were saying, if you recall.
Oh, they were saying all types. People were screaming all types of stuff. They were mad that Vice President Pence was going to accept the electorals. It was a little. If you could think it up, you were hearing it.
I believe that Vice President Pence was going to certify the electoral votes or not certify them, but I guess that's just changed, correct? And it's a very big disappointment. I think there's several 100,000 people here that are very disappointed.
President Trump did not try to calm his thousands of disappointed supporters. Instead, at almost the same moment violence was getting completely out of hand, Donald Trump sent his 2/24 tweet. The president said, Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution. Despite knowing the Capitol had been breached and the mob was in the building, President Trump called Mike Pence a coward and placed all the blame on him for not stopping the certification.
And if I've got the timeline right, actually, by this point, he knows that they're saying, hang Mike Pence. If I have the timeline right, by that point, he knows they're saying this now, and he's tweeting that Pence is a coward.
He put a target on his own vice president's back. Mr. Pottinger and Ms. Matthews, when we ask you about your reaction to seeing the 2/24 tweet in real time, you both used the same imagery to describe it. President Trump was adding fuel to the fire. Mr. Pottinger, you made the decision to resign after seeing this tweet. Can you please tell us why?
Yes. So that was pretty soon after or shortly before I'd gotten back to the White House. I'd come from off-site. I began to see for the first time those images on TV of the chaos that was unfolding at the Capitol. One of my aides handed me a sheet of paper that contained the tweet that you just read. I read it and was quite disturbed by it. I was disturbed and worried to see that the president was attacking Vice President Pence for doing his constitutional duty. So the tweet looked to me like the opposite of what we really needed at that moment, which was a de-escalation. And that's why I had said earlier that it looked like fuel being poured on the fire. So that was the moment that I decided that I was going to resign, that would be my last day at the White House. I simply didn't want to be associated with the events that were unfolding on the Capitol.
Thank you. And Ms. Matthews, what was your reaction to the president's tweet about Vice President Pence?
So it was obvious that the situation at the Capitol was violent and escalating quickly. And so I thought that the tweet about the vice president was the last thing that was needed in that moment. And I remember thinking that this was going to be bad for him to tweet this because it was essentially him giving the green light to these people, telling them that what they were doing at the steps of the Capitol and entering the Capitol was okay, that they were justified in their anger. And he shouldn't have been doing that. He should have been telling these people to go home and to leave and to condemn the violence that we were seeing. And I'm someone who has worked with him. I worked on the campaign, traveled all around the country, going to countless rallies with him. And I've seen the impact that his words have on his supporters. They truly latch on to every word and every tweet that he says. And so I think that in that moment, for him to tweet out the message about Mike Pence, it was him pouring gasoline on the fire and making it much worse.
And he knew by this point there was no fraud.
Thank you both. And let's watch what others also told us about their reactions to this tweet.
I don't remember when exactly I heard about that tweet, but my reaction to it is that's a terrible tweet. And I disagreed with the sentiment, and I thought it was wrong.
What was your reaction when you saw that tweet?
Extremely unhelpful.
Why?
It wasn't the message that we needed at at that time. It wasn't going to, the scenes at the U.S. Capitol were only getting worse at that point. This was not going to help that.
Were you concerned it could make it worse?
Certainly.
Ms. Hutchinson, what was your reaction when you saw this tweet?
As a staffer that worked to always represent the administration to the best of my ability and to showcase the good things that he had done for the country, I remember feeling frustrated, disappointed, and really, it felt personal. It was really sad. As an American, I was disgusted. It was unpatriotic. It was un-American. We were watching the Capitol building get defaced over a lie.
As you will see, at 2:26, the Vice President had to be evacuated to safety a second time and came within 40 feet of the rioters. The attack escalated quickly right after the tweet. During this chaos, what did President Trump do at that point? He went back to calling senators to try to further delay the electoral count. While the Vice President was being evacuated from the Senate, President Trump called Senator Tommy Tuberville, one of his strongest supporters in the Senate. As Senator Tuberville later recalled, he had to end the call so that he could evacuate the Senate chamber himself. Let's listen.
He didn't call my phone, called somebody else, and they handed it to me. And I basically told him, I said, Mr. President, we're not doing much work here right now because they just took our vice president out. And matter of fact, I'm going to have to hang up on you. I've got to leave.
Senator Josh Hawley also had to flee. Earlier that afternoon, before the joint session started, he walked across the east front of the Capitol. As you can see in this photo, he raised his fist in solidarity with the protesters already amassing at the security gates. We spoke with a Capitol police officer who was out there at the time. She told us that Senator Hawley's gesture riled up the crowd, and it bothered her greatly because he was doing it in a safe space, protected by the officers and the barriers. Later that day, Senator Hawley fled after those protesters he helped to rile up stormed the Capitol. See for yourself. Think about what we've seen. Undeniable violence at the Capitol. The Vice President being evacuated to safety by the Secret Service. Senators running through the hallways of the Senate to get away from the mob. As the Commander-in-Chief, President Trump was oath and duty bound to protect the Capitol. His senior staff understood that.
Do you believe, Jared, that the President has an obligation to ensure a peaceful transfer of power?
Yes.
And do you think the President has an obligation to defend all three branches of our government?
I believe so.
And I assume you also would agree the President has a particular obligation to take care that the laws be faithfully executed.
That is one of the President's obligations, correct?
No, I mean, I asked what his duty is.
Well, I mean, there's a constitutional duty. What he has, he's the Commander-in-Chief. And that was that was my biggest issue with him as National Security Advisor.
Rather than uphold his duty to the Constitution, President Trump allowed the mob to achieve the delay that he hoped would keep him in power. I reserve.
The gentlewoman reserves. I request that those in the hearing room remain seated until the Capitol Police have escorted members and witnesses from the room. I now declare the committee in recess for a period of approximately 10 minutes.
And with that, the committee's vice chair.
All right. So they are in recess for 10 minutes. We're about 2 minutes behind, so we'll soak up that time real quick, and that should be about 8 minutes before they come back. As Andrew, you are muted, but welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. And what are your thoughts so far?
They're going over quite a lot of stuff that they've gone over before, maybe with different people in different interviews. I'm showing a lot of the same footage. They seem really hyper-focused on what Trump was doing in the White House at the time all this stuff was going on, and I think that it was his actions were reprehensible in what was going on. I mean, if he committed some sort of crime, they definitely needed to turn that evidence over to the DOJ to prosecute, because we shouldn't be having presidents indulging in this kind of stuff. But and I did miss the first part, so maybe they showed some other stuff. But what I've seen so far, it's like they've been over this already, and I didn't hear anything that I didn't already know. So I'm just kind of wondering why they're rehashing the exact same thing.
Well, you had lamented previously a sort of a lack of corroboration, and they did go over a few other people before you showed up who corroborated elements of the story about Trump attempting to get to the Capitol despite being told by the Secret Service that they were not going to go there, the confrontation that happened. So we saw other witnesses who corroborated what previous witnesses had said. So do you think that you had, if I recall, complained that there hadn't been a lot of corroboration? Do you feel that this might corroborate it some more in your mind?
Yeah, some of the general things, like where he went, as far as the specific things, like what exactly he did in the dining room, and talking about how they believe that he, somebody said that he threw his plate against the wall, and some of the actions that he allegedly took while in the car on the way, where he tried to grab the steering wheel and stuff to. And of course, the Secret Service themselves came out and said that wasn't true. The description of the events that happened in the car when he was saying he wanted to go, the fact that he wanted to go to the down to the Capitol wasn't in dispute, but they disputed what he actually did inside the car.
But there was a dispute over him trying to grab the steering wheel. Because my understanding was that the Secret Service man involved in that did not refute it.
The Secret Service itself came out and said that that testimony that she had given was inaccurate.
All right,
I don't know if they. Yeah, I don't know if they talked to the. And maybe I misheard that, so maybe double check. But I could have swore that I heard that the Secret Service organization released an official statement saying that those actions didn't actually happen. He didn't grab the steering wheel, and he didn't try choking one of his Secret Service agents. But double check, because maybe I misheard that.
All right. Well, the one thing we did have a corroboration on, though, was a second person who said in fact, I think it was the one who had told Ms. Hutchinson. He came out and said that yes, he had in fact been asked about the getting the president to come out and denounce the violence, especially now that they were calling for the hanging of Mike Pence. And he said, you heard him. He thinks that Mike Pence deserved it. He doesn't think they're wrong. So, yes.
Hearing that from another place, I'm like, okay, yeah. And it wouldn't have surprised me. Like the first point, I was like, look, this is a bunch of hearsay. It's like the people who are testifying are saying what they heard other people say. And so having more corroboration from more witnesses that say, hey, yeah, this actually did happen. The fact that it happened, it surprised me so much. I just was a little disappointed that they weren't bringing out the testimony, like when they were trying to say, look, had been informed that they were accepting, hang my Pence, and then saying, well, maybe he deserves it, or whatever it was exactly that they claimed that he said. Why wouldn't they have given all of the all the different people that testified to saying that at once? I mean, it's like they could have come out with the three people that they had to corroborate that, but they only came with one. Now this one is they did bring some more people in, and that, like I said, I think his actions during this time frame are atrocious, and I don't think we should tolerate it. This is absolutely horrible things for a president to be doing. As far as, was it criminal? I want to know if it's criminal, because if they can support criminal charges, he should absolutely be charged with this. I don't think I've made it any unclear that I think that he did a really shitty job in this, and that we shouldn't be allowing this. There shouldn't even be talk of him running for a second term with just even if he did nothing criminally wrong and just refused to act on something. And they say, well, it's not illegal to do that. I still think that he should be, thoroughly repudiated, and yet we're still hearing that maybe he's going to run again, and that disturbs me, because this is not the kind of person that we want, pulling these kinds of shenanigans. It needs to be resoundingly told, no, we don't do this in a constitutional republic, because if we do, we risk losing that constitutional republic. Maybe not this time because you're incompetent, but the next person who tries this may not be so incompetent.
Well, that was what I found so amazing, because you've said that a couple of times, that you should never, if your party is in power, you should never give your party, the executive branch, legislators, anything like that, power that you wouldn't want the opposition to have, because they will eventually get it. That's the way the system works. And the powers that they were trying to give Mike Pence to basically decide the election, I'm sitting there going, you can't take those back. And Eastman was like, oh yeah, we're just making this one exception. It's like, it doesn't work that way. It works on precedent. If you say that the vice president can do this, every vice president going forward is going to determine the election. There's no more voting. It's done. It's over, baby. That's it. And it was
with rare exception. That's absolutely true. And there's notable recent examples of overturning something that was this is what it is for the last 50 years. But generally speaking, as soon as you grant a power to government, the government never gives that power up. I mean, who was I believe Ronald Reagan? That at least he's attributed to saying nothing so permanent as a temporary government program. So it's you don't do things, you don't tolerate things like this. Because then if you do it, and at worse, you get away with it, well, your opponents are definitely going to use that exact same strategy, because they clearly saw that it was effective. And so it's going to be used against you. And it only stabilizes and erodes our constitutional republic. And I happen to think that a constitutional republic is a wonderful thing. I think that it's, given, well, at least more wonderful than any other thing we've tried throughout history. And it's inarguably created the most prosperity the world has ever seen, ever. Like I don't think it's a great idea to undermine it, to chip away at it. And this does exactly that, and it really pisses me off.
Okay, so Sinister Porpoise. But thank you, by the way, Sinister, for becoming a member. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your support. So thank you so much for that. Senator, can I get a sound check real quick?
Me?
Yes, thank you. That was sufficient. Thank you. So Zandering finally realizes that anarchists are right when they say rights are not given by the government; they are taken from the government. Actually, but yeah, I don't think it attributed that to anarchists, but I suspect anyway. Says Zandering. So, do you finally agree with anarchists? Are you finally converted?
I think that anarchists have an interesting idea that is not possible to be implemented today or even in the near future. That we have to have a fundamental shift in the average person's view of the world and their role in it. before anything like anarchy can actually successfully happen. Because there's evil people in the world that will do evil things, and until that changes, anarchy will never succeed.
Yeah, yes. I think I make the same argument with socialism. I think socialism, so let me rephrase that. Marxism is what I'll go with. It has a level of idealism that is unrealistic and means it's not going to succeed, at least on a large scale. It can succeed on small scales. I think that's been demonstrated. But also the same thing with actually unfettered capitalism. I think I've talked about Rand many times. I love Rand. I think I love it. Her ideas actually really for the simplicity of where she was going. I don't think it's tenable for all the same reasons that none of the other philosophies are. We're always looking for this simple, concept, this simple, solution, and it always seems to.
I agree that unfettered capitalism has the problem of it doesn't care about people who are incapable of caring for themselves. And so as long as you don't care about that kind of bottom 10 or 15% of people that are just essentially going to die horrible deaths from starvation and depression, if you don't care about them, then unfettered capitalism works great. And as long as you don't care that there's going, the Pareto distribution is something that is observed in reality, and that you're going to end up with a very, very small minority of the population with the overwhelming majority of resources. And if you're okay with all of that, because it'll be the most efficient use of or allocation of resources, fine with that, then unfettered capitalism works awesome. Most of us aren't okay with those things. So
that's actually, I think that's an important observation. I think that's a really important observation I think that's a good point. Because there are also, by the way, as you full know, there are people who are okay with that and think that that's the way it should be and that the species would be stronger if you did that. And you start getting very close to eugenics around that kind of thing. All right, it looks like the committee's coming back. Any final words as the committee returns?
We'll see what else they have to say. I'm hoping that they get into new stuff and they can connect some more of these dots, because right now they've got a bunch of dots that are horrible behavior, and I haven't really seen them connecting it to seditious reason or whatever they were talking about, but maybe they will.
All right.
Is the gentleman from Illinois.
We left at the recess just after President Trump's 224 tweet attacking the vice president. By this time, the president had been in his dining room for an hour. I want you to just think of what you would have done if you were in his shoes and had the power to end the violence. You would have immediately and forcefully told the rioters to stop and leave. Like, stop and leave. Done. As you heard, that's exactly what his senior staff had been urging him to do. But he resisted, and he kept resisting for another almost 2 hours. In the meantime, all the president did was post 2 tweets. One at 2:38 and the other at 3:13. One said, quote, "Stay peaceful." The other said, quote, "Remain peaceful." But the president already knew that the mob was attacking the police and had invaded the Capitol. Neither tweet condemned the violence or told the mob to leave the Capitol and disperse. To appreciate how obvious it was that President Trump was not meeting this moment, it's helpful to look at the real-time reactions of his own son, Don Jr., to the first tweet, captured in a series of text messages with Mark Meadows. I'll warn the audience that these messages contain some strong language. As you can see, Don Jr. first texted Mr. Meadows at 2:53. He wrote, "He's got to condemn this shit ASAP. The Capitol Police tweet is not enough." Mr. Meadows replied, "I am pushing it hard. I agree." Don Jr. responded, "This is one you go to the mattresses on. They will try to fuck his entire legacy if it gets worse." Here's what Don Jr. told us he meant by go to the mattresses.
At 2:58, when you say that that Mr. Meadows needs to go to the mattresses on this issue, when you say go to the mattresses, what does that mean?
It's just a reference for going all in. I think it's a Godfather reference.
Sean Hannity agreed, and he also turned to Mark Meadows for help after the president's second tweet. As you can see, Mr. Hannity texted at 3:31 to say Trump needed to deliver a statement to the nation telling the rioters to leave the Capitol. Mr. Meadows responded that he was, quote, on it. Don Jr. and Sean Hannity were not the only ones who implored Mr. Meadows to get the president to speak to the nation and tell the mob to leave, to go home, go home. Throughout the attack, Mr. Meadows received texts from Republican members of Congress, from current and former Trump administration officials, from media personalities, and from friends. Like President Trump's staff, they knew President Trump had to speak publicly to get the mob to stop. Let's look at just a few of these text messages. Fox News personality Laura Ingraham said, "The president needs to tell the people in the Capitol to go home." Former Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney urged Mark, he needs to stop this now. Fox News personality Brian Kilmeade said, "Please get him on TV, destroying everything that you guys have accomplished." When we interviewed White House counsel Pat Cipollone, he told us that he knew the president's 2 tweets were not enough. Let's listen to what he said.
I think the question is, did you believe that the tweets were not anything about your advice to the president?
No, I believe more needed to be done. Okay. I believed that a public statement needed to be made.
When others on the staff thinking more should be done, who would you put in that category?
Pat Philbin, Eric, Mark Meadows, Jared, General was there, but I don't. Dan Scavino.
Who on the staff?
On the staff?
In the White House, how about?
You know, the Capitol wants to, you know.
What about the president?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, there was
She said
one.
the staff. So I answered.
No, I said in the White House.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. I thought you said who else on the staff.
Yeah, we know the answer.
Can't reveal communications, but obviously I think, you know.
Only one. Only one. Thank you. I can testify for you. It was only one.
Yeah.
Okay. Well done.
Let's pause on that last statement. Although Pat Cipollone is being careful about exactly what he said, almost everybody wanted President Trump to instruct the mob to disperse. President Trump refused. To understand how inadequate the president's tweets were, let's examine his 238 tweet in more detail.
They broke the glass. Everybody stay down. Get down.
Doors barricade. There's people flooded the hallways out.
Just told that there has been tear gas in the rotunda, and we're being instructed to each of us get a gas mask.
We went from a peaceful protest, and this is a very dangerous situation right now, that there are, I'm being told, these protesters on the inside are around both chambers, and there is now tear gas inside the Capitol Rotunda. In fact, members locked in the House are being instructed to put on masks.
Ms. Matthews, after President Trump's tweet about Vice President Pence, you told us you spoke to, immediately, you spoke to Kayleigh McEnany. What did you tell her, and where did she go afterwards?
After the tweet about the vice president, I found Kayleigh and told her that I thought the president needed to immediately send out a tweet that condemned the violence that we were seeing, and that there needed to be a call to action to tell these people to leave the Capitol. And she agreed and walked over to the Oval dining room to find the president.
We interviewed Ms. McEnany and others who were in the dining room with the president, urging him to put out a statement. Ms. Matthews, Ms. McEnany told us she came right back to the press office after meeting with the president about this particular tweet. What did she tell you about?
She told me that a tweet had been sent out, and I told her that I thought the tweet did not go far enough, that I thought there needed to be a room full of people, but people weren't paying attention, and so she looked directly at me. Sort of mention of peace in that tweet, and that it took some convincing on their part, those who were in the room, and she said that there was a back and forth going over different phrases to find something that he was comfortable with, and it wasn't until Ivanka Trump suggested the phrase "stay peaceful" that he finally agreed to include it.
The president resisted writing "stay peaceful" in a tweet. He told Mark Meadows that the rioters were doing what they should be doing, and the rioters understood they were doing what President Trump wanted them to do. President Trump's message was heard clearly by Stop the Steal organizer Ali Alexander. At 2:38, he told another organizer, quote, "POTUS is not ignorant of what his words would do." Rioters storming the Capitol also heard President Trump's message. A group of Oath Keepers, including Jessica Watkins, who's been charged with seditious conspiracy. You'll hear her walkie-talkie communications with others as they share intelligence and communicate about President Trump's 2:38 tweet in real time. Again, we warn the audience that this clip also contains.
CNN just said that they evacuated all members of Congress into a safety room.
There's no safe place in the United States for any of these motherfuckers right now, let me tell you.
I hope they understand that we are not joking around.
Military. 05, cave means grave.
Trump just tweeted, "Please support our Capitol Police. They are on our side. Do not harm them."
That's saying a lot by what he didn't say. He didn't say not to do anything to the congressman.
Well, he did not ask them to stand down. He just said, stand by the Capitol Police. They are on our side, and they are good people. So it's getting real down there. I got it on TV, and it's looking pretty friggin' radical to me. CNN said that Trump has egged this on, that he is egging it on, and that he is watching the country burn 2 weeks before he leaves office. He is not leaving office. I don't give a shit what they say.
We are in the mezzanine. We are in the main dome right now. We are rocking it. They're throwing grenades. They're freaking shooting people with paintballs, but we're in here.
Be safe, be safe. God bless and Godspeed, and keep going.
Get it, Jess. Do your shit. This is what we fucking lived up for. Everything we fucking trained for.
Took over the Capitol, overran the Capitol.
We're in the fucking Capitol, bro.
We've now seen how President Trump's supporters reacted to his tweets. Mr. Pottinger, you told us that you consider the tweets sent to this point to be, quote, wholly inadequate given the urgency of the crisis. What, in your view, would have been needed?
Yeah, it was insufficient. I think you could count me among those who was hoping to see an unequivocal, strong statement clearing out the Capitol, telling people to stand down, leave, go home. I think that's what we were hoping for.
So something a lot more kind of definitive and not ambiguous, because he has that power over his folks. Ms. Matthews, you told not condemn the violence. Can you please tell us about that moment and your reaction?
Yes, so a conversation started in the press office after the president sent out those 2 tweets that I deemed were insufficient. And a colleague suggested that the president shouldn't condemn the violence because they thought it would be, quote, handing a win to the media if he were to condemn his supporters. And I disagreed. I thought that we should condemn the violence and condemn it unequivocally. And I thought that he needed to include a call to action and to tell these people to go home. And a debate ensued over it. And I became visibly frustrated, and my colleagues were well aware of that. And I couldn't believe that we were arguing over this in the middle of the West Wing, talking about the politics of a tweet, being concerned with handing the media a win when we had just watched all of that violence unfold at the Capitol. And so I motioned up at the TV and I said, do you think it looks like we're effing winning? Because I don't think it does. And I again reiterated that I thought that the president needed to condemn the violence because it didn't matter if it was coming from the left or the right, that you should condemn violence 100% of the time.
Or to tell the mob to leave the Capitol. One of those people was Republican leader Kevin McCarthy. As you will hear, the president refused, and so Leader McCarthy reached out for help to Ivanka Trump, who was at the White House, and Jared Kushner, who that afternoon had just arrived back.
So at some point in the afternoon, Mr. McCarthy placed a phone call to Mr. Scavino's desk line, and it was transferred to the president. Is that correct? Involved in transferring that call?
Yes.
Okay. Where was the president at the time that he took that call?
He was in the dining room.
Would you personally reach out to the president for more support?
I've already talked to the president. I called him. I think we need to make a statement, make sure that we can calm individuals down.
Did Mr. McCarthy indicate that he had been in touch with President Trump?
He indicated that he had had some conversation. I don't recall whether it was with the president or with somebody at the White House, but I think he'd expressed frustration that not taking the circumstances seriously as they should in that moment.
You know, I asked Kevin McCarthy, who's the Republican leader, about this. And he said he called Donald Trump. He finally got through to Donald Trump, and he said, you have got to get on TV. You've got to get on Twitter. You've got to call these people off. You know what the president said to him? This is as it's happening. He said, well, Kevin, these aren't my people. You know, these are Antifa. And Kevin responded and said, no, they're your people. They literally just came through my office windows, and my staff are running for cover. I mean, they're running for their lives. You need to call them off. And the president's response to Kevin, to me, was chilling. He said, well, Kevin, I guess they're just more upset about the election, theft than you are. And that's, you've seen widespread reports of Kevin McCarthy and the president having basically a swearing conversation. That's when the swearing commenced, because the president was basically saying, I'm okay with this.
Leader McCarthy, the President of the United States has a briefing room steps from the Oval Office. The cameras are hot 24/7, as you know. Why hasn't he walked down and said that now?
I conveyed to the president what I think is best to do, and I'm hopeful the president will do it.
And have you spoken with his chief of staff?
I've spoken to the president. I've spoken to other people in there and to the White House as well.
Who else reached out to Ms. Trump that you know of that afternoon about the attack on the Capitol?
I believe at one point McCarthy did.
heard my phone ringing, turned the shower off, saw it was Leader McCarthy, who I had a good relationship with. He told me it was getting really ugly over at the Capitol and said, please, anything you could do to help, I would appreciate it. I don't recall specific asks, just anything you could do. Again, I got the sense that, they were scared.
They meaning Leader McCarthy and people on the Hill because of the violence?
That he was scared, yes.
Think about that. Leader McCarthy, who was one of the president's strongest supporters, was scared and begging for help.
I want to point something out here real quick, which is it's obvious that the president didn't care either way who or what was even causing this. This appears to me to be very much the desired outcome. How do I know that? Well, because he used two mutually exclusive arguments within seconds of each other. The first one is, well, this is Antifa. It isn't my people. We would never do anything like this. This is not us. This is Antifa. And as soon as he said, no, it really isn't Antifa, he said, okay, well, maybe they're just more upset about it than you are, which is a complete reversal. It's, okay, it is our people, but they're right. That very argument is precluded by the first one, that our people would never have done this because it's obviously so terrible, so I can't stop it. It doesn't matter. He doesn't care what the facts are. He wants this to continue. This is absolutely what he's looking for. That's the only way you can make both of those arguments within seconds of each other. Is he only cares about the outcome. He doesn't, nothing else.
President Trump turned him down. So he tried to call the president's children. Republican House member Mike Gallagher also implored the president to call off the attack.
Mr. President, you have got to stop this. You are the only person who can call this off. Call it off. The election is over. Call it off.
President-elect Joe Biden also went live on TV to demand that President Trump tell the mob to leave.
I call on President Trump to go on national television now to fulfill his oath and defend the Constitution and demand an end to this siege.
There was a desperate scramble for everyone to get President Trump to do anything. All this occurred, and the president still did not act. I yield to my friend from Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. 𝐂𝐚𝐥𝐥. President Trump finally relented to the pleas from his staff, his family, and from Capitol Hill for him to do something more at 4:17, 187 minutes, more than 3 hours after he stopped speaking at the ellipse, after he stopped speaking to a mob that he had sent armed to the Capitol. That's when he tweeted a video telling the rioters to go home, while also telling them that they were special and that he loved them. By that time, although, the violence was far from over. Law enforcement had started to turn the tide, reinforcements were on the way, and elected officials were in secure locations. The writing was already on the wall. The rioters would not succeed. Here's what was showing on Fox News, the channel the president was watching all afternoon.
Back to Brett Baer with more information now. Brett, what do you have?
Our Pentagon team, Jen Griffin, Lucas Tomlinson, confirming the Defense Department has now mobilized the entire D.C. National Guard, 1,800 troops. Takes several hours, as I was mentioning before, to get them up and running. The Army Secretary Ron McCarthy is setting up a headquarters at the FBI. You just heard from David Spunt that the FBI is also sending troops to the Capitol.
It's no coincidence, then, that President Trump finally gave in and went out to the Rose Garden at 4:03. His staff had prepared a script for him to read, but he refused to use it. The script said, quote, "I'm asking you to leave the Capital Region now and go home in a peaceful way." The president was urged to stick to this script, but he spoke off the cuff. Eric Hirschman and Nick Luna went with the president to film the message in the Rose Garden. Let's hear what they had to say and see the never-before-seen raw footage of the president recording this video message.
Ultimately, these remarks that we're looking at here in Exhibit 25 were not the remarks that the president delivered in the Rose Garden. Do you know why the president decided not to use these?
I don't know, sir. No, I do not know why.
Did the president use any written remarks to your knowledge, or did he just go off the cuff?
To my knowledge, it was off the cuff, sir.
Good, Chase? Yep. When you're ready, sir. Yep. You'll be right behind you.
You tell me when.
When you're ready, sir.
Who's behind me?
Okay. He's gone around. We're all clear now.
I know your pain. I know you're hurt. We had a election. Let me see. I know your pain. I know you're hurt. We had an election that was stolen from us. It was a landslide election, and everyone knows it, especially the other side. But you have to go home now. We have to have peace. We have to have law and order. We have to respect our great people in law and order. We don't want anybody hurt. It's a very tough period of time. There's never been a time like this where such a thing happened, where they could take it away from all of us, from me, from you, from our country. This was a fraudulent election, but we can't play into the hands of these people. We have to have peace. So go home. We love you. You're very special. You've seen what happens. You see the way others are treated that are so bad and so evil. I know how you feel. But go home and go home in peace.
When I got there, basically the president just had finished filming the video, and I think he was basically retiring for the day.
Was there any discussion about the president releasing a second video that day?
Not that I recall. When he finished his video, I think everyone was like, day's over. People were pretty drained.
Were pretty what?
Drained.
But we say day over, there were still people in the Capitol at that point, weren't there?
There were people in the Capitol, but I believe by this stage, law enforcement, and I'd have to go back and look, but I believe law enforcement was either there or moving in or going to take charge. I just tell you, people were emotionally drained by the time that videotape was done.
Emotionally drained? At the White House? Here's what was happening at the same time at the Capitol. We warned the audience that this clip also contains strong language and violence.
Hey, keep pushing, don't lose the momentum. Another officer unconscious. The terrorist. What terrorist?
Everybody, we need gas masks. We need weapons. We need strong, angry patriots to help our boys. They don't want to leave.
While President Trump refused to even lift another finger to help, other leaders honored their oaths and acted to clear the Capitol and resume the joint session. For instance, here are never-before-seen photos and video of congressional leaders in action during the attack. The video is a portion of a call they had at approximately 4:45 with Acting Secretary of Defense, Chris Miller.
We're not going to let these people keep us from finishing our business. So we need you to get the building cleared, give us the okay so we can go back in session and finish up the people's business as soon as possible.
Mr. Secretary and Senator Schumer, some people here in the Capitol Police believe it would take us several days to secure the building. Do you agree with that analysis?
I'm not on the ground, but I do not agree with that analysis.
So what is the earliest that we could safely resume our proceedings in the Senate and House chambers? The earliest we could safely resume?
Here's my assessment, but I prefer to be on the ground, which I personally would prefer to be right now, but I need to be here. I would say, best case, we're looking at 4 to 5 hours.
The Vice President also worked the phones from his own secure evacuation location, including conversations with Acting Secretary of Defense Miller and other military leaders, well past President Trump's 417 video. Let's look at some never-before-seen photographs of the Vice President during this critical time and hear about the Vice President's conversation with military leaders to secure the Capitol and ensure everyone was safe.
Vice President Pence, there were 2 or 3 calls with Vice President Pence. He was very animated, and he issued very explicit, very direct, unambiguous orders. There was no question about that, and he was, and I can get you the exact quotes, I guess, from some of our records somewhere. But he was very animated, very direct, very firm, and to Secretary Miller, get the military down here, get the Guard down here, put down this situation, etc.
As you heard earlier in the hearing, the President did not call the Vice President or anyone in the military, federal law enforcement, or DC government. Not a single person. But General Milley did hear from Mark Meadows. The contrast between that call and his calls with Vice President Pence tell you everything you need to know about President Trump.
He said, this is from memory, he said, we have to kill the narrative that the Vice President is making all the decisions. We need to establish the narrative that, that the President is still in charge and that things are steady or stable or what's that thing. I immediately interpret that as politics, 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 red flag for me personally, no action, but I remember it distinctly. I don't do political narratives.
So while President Trump and his advisors were drained, other leaders upheld their oaths to do the right thing. Maybe it was exhausting to get the president to put out that video, but think about the law enforcement officers who were attacked by the mob that day. And President Trump had summoned them himself to Washington. And what about President Trump? He watched TV, tweeted, called senators to try to delay the count of electoral votes, called Rudy Giuliani, and argued with his staff who were in. Ms. Matthews, what was your reaction to President Trump's message to the mob at 417?
I was struck by the fact that he chose to begin the video by pushing the lie that there was a stolen election. And as the video went on, I felt a small sense of relief because he finally told these people to go home. We love you, you're very special. And that was disturbing to me because he didn't distinguish between those that peacefully attended his speech earlier that day and those that we watched cause violence at the Capitol. Instead, he told the people who we had just watched storm our nation's Capitol with the intent on overthrowing our democracy, violently attack police officers, and chant heinous things like "Hang Mike Pence. We love you, you're very special." And as a spokesperson for him, I knew that I would be asked to defend that. And to me, his refusal to act and call off the mob that day and his refusal to condemn the violence was indefensible. And so I knew that I would be resigning that evening. And so I finished out the workday, went home and called my loved ones to tell them of my decision and resigned that evening.
But he also, when doing those things, saying "we love you" and all these other things, he once again reiterated what he knew for a fact was not true, which was that the election had been rigged. By this point, he knows it's not true. He's tried to get the Justice Department to say it's true. He's tried it. Wow.
Thank you. Indefensible. Let's hear what some of your colleagues in the press office told us about their reaction.
I felt like it was the absolute bare minimum of what could have been said at that point for something on camera.
What else do you think should have been said?
So a more forceful dismissal of the violence, a more forceful command to go home, a more forceful respect for law enforcement, even a comparison to the respect that we have given law enforcement as it relates to what was done to them in the prior summer. And I thought it was important that an acknowledgement be given to the U.S. Capitol building itself, what it's a symbol of, what it means, not only to the people and the work of Congress that by law needed to be conducted that day.
Do you wish, in hindsight, that the president had asked the protesters to leave the Capitol earlier than he ended up asking them to do that?
Of course, I would love if the go home message would have happened earlier in the day.
The president's words matter. We know that many of the rioters were listening to President Trump. We heard from one last week, Stephen Ayers. Let's listen to what he had to say about the 417 message from the president and see how rioters reacted to the president's message in real time.
Well, when we were there, as soon as that come out, everybody started talking about it, and it seemed like it started to disperse, some of the crowd.
I'm here delivering the president's message. Donald Trump has asked everybody to go home.
That's our order.
He says go home. He says go home.
Yeah, he said to go home.
But just as Mr. Ayers said, police were still fending off the last throes of the brutal assault. I yield to the gentleman from Illinois.
Well, and if they're Antifa, which they're still Trump supporters that say this was Antifa, this was all fake. If that's true, they wouldn't have gone home when he told them to.
Ms. Matthews, what was your reaction to President Trump's 601 tweet?
At that point, I had already made the decision to resign, and this tweet just further cemented my decision. I thought that January 6, 2021 was one of the darkest days in our nation's history, and President Trump was treating it as a celebratory occasion with that tweet. And so it just further cemented my decision to resign.
Others agreed with your assessment of that tweet. Let's look at what they had to say.
Who asked you about this tweet before it was sent?
The president.
Tell us about that conversation and everything that you said and he said, to the best of your recollection.
Sure. So he said, "What do you think of this?" And I believe I saw the text message or on his phone. And I remember saying to him, the wording on the first sentence, I guess it's one long sentence, but the wording on the first sentence would lead some to believe that potentially he had something to do with the events that happened at the Capitol.
What did he say?
I don't recall him saying anything in response to that. I believe that was the end of the conversation.
Did he change anything in light of your comments?
No, sir, he did not.
And what about this made you think that someone might perceive the president having a role in the violence at the Capitol?
It was my interpretation of the words. I mean, I'm not I don't write speeches or anything, but the phrase, "these are the things that happened," to me sounded as if culpability was associated with it, to me.
I don't think it's a patriotic act to attack the Capitol, but I have no idea how to characterize the people other than they trespassed, destroyed property, and assaulted the U.S. Capitol. I think calling them patriots is, let's say, a stretch, to say the least.
Is that all it is, a stretch, or just flatly wrong?
I don't think it's a patriotic act to attack the U.S. Capitol.
Would you call it unpatriotic?
Criminal? Unpatriotic, sure.
What happened at the Capitol cannot be justified in any form or fashion. It was wrong and it was tragic, and it was a terrible day. It was a terrible day for this country.
I thought it was inappropriate.
Why?
To my mind, it was a day that should be remembered in infamy. That wasn't the tenor of this tweet.
Despite the violence of the day, the effort to delay the certification continued. That evening, Rudy Giuliani called several of President Trump's closest political allies in the hour before the joint session resumed. Representative Jim Jordan and Senators Marsha Blackburn, Tommy Tuberville, Bill Hagerty, Lindsey Graham, Josh Hawley, and Ted Cruz. We know why Mr. Giuliani was calling them, because at 7:02, he left a voicemail for Senator Tuberville, which later became public. Let's listen to just the start of it.
Senator Tuberville, or I should say Coach Tuberville, this is Rudy Giuliani, President's lawyer. I'm calling you because I want to discuss with you how they're trying to rush this hearing and how we need you, our Republican friends, to try to just slow it down so we can get these legislatures to get more information to you.
Mr. Giuliani did not even mention the attack on the Capitol. Instead, he was pushing on behalf of President Trump to get members of Congress to further delay the certification. Even though some members did proceed with objections, Vice President Pence and Congress stood firm and successfully concluded the joint session in the early morning hours of January 7th.
I'd also like to add, and we know this already, and this is an extraordinarily important point, he already admitted, and I think we heard this in the 6th hearing, that he had no evidence. Quote, "We have lots of theories, but no evidence." No evidence. When he was asked what was the evidence that this fraud had actually taken place, Giuliani's reply was, "We have no evidence," and that was before this attack.
Here are some of what members of the president's party said in the days and weeks after the attack.
There's no question, none, that President Trump is practically and morally responsible for provoking the events of the day. No question about it. The people who stormed this building believe they were acting on the wishes and instructions of their president. And having that belief was a foreseeable consequence of the growing crescendo of false statements, conspiracy theories, and reckless hyperbole, which the defeated president kept shouting into the largest megaphone on planet Earth.
The violence, destruction, and chaos we saw earlier was unacceptable, undemocratic, and un-American. It was the saddest day I've ever had as serving as a member of this institution.
Madam Speaker, today the People's House was attacked, which is an attack on the Republic itself. There is no excuse for it. A woman died, and people need to go to jail. And the president should never have spun up certain Americans to believe something that simply cannot be.
Well, after 3 a.m, Congress certified the 2020 election results. Soon after, this statement by President Trump was posted on Dan Scavino's Twitter account because the president's account by now had been suspended. As you can see, President Trump stuck with his big lie that the election was stolen. But he did say there would be an orderly transition. We learned, though, that the statement was not necessarily his idea. Jason Miller, a campaign advisor, told us that after the joint session started, he heard nothing from President Trump or the White House about assuring the nation that the transfer of power would take place. So Mr. Miller took it upon himself to draft the statement and call the president at 9:23 that night to convince him to put it out. Let's listen to what he had to say about the call.
Did he disagree with something that you had put in the statement, some particular word or phrase that he did not want included?
I'd say just he wanted to say peaceful transition, and I said that ship's kind of already sailed, so we're going to say orderly transition. That was about the extent of disagreement or pushback from the conversation.
The last person President Trump spoke to by phone that night was Johnny McEntee, his head of personnel. Mr. McEntee told us that they talked about the events of the day and the multiple resignation by administration officials. The decision whether to resign was one that weighed heavily on people in the administration. On the one hand, people like Mr. Pottinger and Ms. Matthews here, as proud as they were to have served, refused to be associated with President Trump's dereliction of duty. But others were sincerely worried that leaving President Trump to his own devices would put the country at continued risk. Listen to what we heard about that tension from Pat Cipollone, from General Mark Milley, and Eugene Scalia, who was the Secretary of Labor.
And then after that, some people were resigning, obviously, over January 6th. We know who they were. Did I consider it? Yes. Did I do it? No. Concerned about is if people in the counsel's office left, who would replace me? And I had some concerns that it might be somebody who, had been giving bad advice.
On the morning of the 7th, the decision I arrived at was that the most constructive thing I could think of was to seek a meeting of the cabinet. I thought that trying to work within the administration to steady the ship was likely to have greater value than simply resigning, after which point I would have been powerless to really affect things with the administration.
Gene thought that there should be a cabinet meeting.
Do you know why Mark thought it would not be?
I don't remember why. I think it probably had something to do with Mark's view of how the president might react and that but things like that.
Now, there was a couple of the calls where, Meadows and or Pompeo, but more Meadows, how's the president doing? Like Pompeo might say, how's the president doing? And Meadows would say, well, he's in a really dark place. Like here's one, for example, on the 7th of January. So this is day after, right? POTUS is very emotional and in a bad place. Meadows.
As you heard, Secretary Scalia wanted President Trump to convene a cabinet meeting. He put his request in a memo to the president, and here's what it said. You can see that Secretary Scalia recommended that the president, quote, no longer publicly question the election results after Wednesday. No one can deny this is harmful. Secretary Scalia also highlighted the importance of the public knowing the president would invoke his cabinet in decision-making and not, quote, certain private individuals. Though Secretary Scalia did not say it, he was referring to Rudy Giuliani and the rest of the so-called clown car working with President Trump to try to overturn the election. Secretary Scalia understood that the president needed to do more to reassure the public about the last few weeks of the Trump administration. Mr. Pottinger, when you made the decision to resign, did you walk out of the White House immediately?
No, I wanted to first talk to my immediate boss, that was the National Security Advisor, Robert O'Brien. Robert O'Brien was traveling on the 6th, I reached him at about 4:30 p.m. And told him that I was submitting my resignation. He accepted the resignation, but he also asked whether I could stay until he could get back to the White House. And I agreed to that. We both wanted to make sure that I was leaving in a responsible way. We still have foreign adversaries to worry about, hackers, terrorists, nation states. I did not want to leave my chair empty, given that I was the top national security staffer in the White House. So I ended up staying at my desk through the night. When Robert O'Brien arrived back at the White House the next morning, the morning of the 7th, I debriefed with him and left for the last time.
So you and I both share a passion for national security of our country. Can you share with me, what's your view on how January 6th impacted our national security?
Well, when you have a presidential transition, even under the best circumstances, it's a time of vulnerability. It's a time of vulnerability. And when you have a contested election, I was certainly concerned that some of our adversaries would be tempted to probe or test U.S. resolve. As an example, in late December, the Iranian government attacked the U.S. embassy in Baghdad. They did that using some of their terrorist proxies. President Trump did handle that. He sent a very clear warning to the Ayatollah and his regime, which I think had a useful effect. I think that we would have handled other threats of that nature, and luckily no other threats materialized before the inauguration on the 20th. But our national security was harmed in a different way by the 6th of January, and that is that I think it emboldened our enemies by helping give them ammunition to feed a narrative that our system of government doesn't work, that the United States is in decline. China, the Putin regime in Russia, Tehran, they're fond of pushing those kinds of narratives. And by the way, they're wrong. We've been hearing for the entirety of U.S. history from kings and despots that the United States is in decline, and those kings and despots have been proven wrong every single time. But nonetheless, January 6th helped feed a perception that I think emboldens our adversaries. The other part I think is simply our allies. I heard from a lot of friends in Europe, in Asia, allies, close friends, and supporters of the United States that they were concerned about the health of our democracy. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to put their minds at ease, to put our own hearts at ease, by investigating what happened on the 6th and making sure that it never happens again.
Look, I've always said democracies are not defined by bad days. They're defined by how they recover from those bad days. And that's what we're doing here, is to bring accountability to that so we can actually come back even stronger than when we went into January 6th. Ms. Matthews, as you left the White House for the last time that night, January 6th, what did you think Americans needed to hear from President Trump?
I think that the American people needed to hear and see him publicly commit to a peaceful or at least orderly transition of power. In the aftermath of the Capitol attack, it wasn't just enough for us to ask him to condemn the violence. He needed to agree that he would peacefully transfer power over to the incoming administration, because that's one of our fundamentals and what it means to live in a democracy. And so that evening when I resigned, the resignation statement that I drafted, I referenced this and I said our nation needs a peaceful transfer of power, in hopes that it would put some sort of public pressure on the White House and President Trump to publicly agree to an orderly transition.
Thank you. I yield to my friend from Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. 𝐂𝐚𝐥𝐥. The staff who remained at the White House on the morning of January 7th knew the president needed to address the nation again, and they had a speech prepared for him that morning, but he refused for hours to give it. As you heard Cassidy Hutchins testify previously, President Trump finally agreed to record an address to the nation later that evening, the evening of January 7th, because of concerns he might be removed from power under the 25th Amendment or by impeachment. We know these threats were real. Sean Hannity said so himself in a text message that day to Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany. He wrote, "No more stolen election talk. Yes, impeachment and 25th Amendment are real." We obtained the never-before-seen raw footage of the president recording his address to the nation that day on January 7th, more than 24 hours after the last time he had addressed the nation from the Rose Garden. Let's take a look.
Whenever you're ready, sir.
I would like to begin by addressing the heinous attack yesterday, and to those who broke the law, you will pay. You do not represent our movement, you do not represent our country, and if you broke the law, you can't say that. I already said you will pay. The demonstrators who infiltrated the Capitol have defied the seat of justice. It's defiled, right? See, I can't see it very well. Okay, I'll do this. I'm going to do this. Let's go. But this election is now over. Congress has certified the results. I don't want to say the election's over. I just want to say Congress has certified the results without saying the election's over, okay?
But Congress is certified. Now Congress is
Yeah, right.
Now Congress
I didn't say over, so let me see. Go to the paragraph before. Okay? I would like to begin by addressing the heinous attack yesterday. Yesterday is a hard word for me.
Just take it out. The heinous attack.
Good. Take the word yesterday, because it doesn't work with the heinous attack.
Really? I'm so thrilled that he knows all the best words, the biggest words. I can't imagine the problems he'd be having if he didn't know words like yesterday.
On our country. Say on our country. Want to say that?
No, keep it.
My only goal was to ensure the integrity of the vote. My only goal was to ensure the integrity of the vote.
On January 7th, one day after he incited an insurrection based on a lie, President Trump still could not say that the election was over. Mr. Pottinger, you've taken the oath multiple times in the Marines and as an official in the executive branch. Can you please share with us your view about the oath of office and how that translates into accepting election results and a transfer of power?
Sure. You know, this isn't the first time that we've had a close election in this country. And President Trump certainly had every right to challenge in court the results of these various elections. But once you've had due process under the law, you have to conform with the law, no matter how bitter the result. Once you've presented your evidence in court, judges have heard that evidence, judges have ruled. If you continue to contest an election, you're not just contesting an election anymore. You're actually challenging the Constitution itself. You are challenging the societal norms that allow us to remain unified. I think that one example, for example, you've got Vice President Richard Nixon back in 1960 had lost a hard-fought election against Senator John F. Kennedy. There were irregularities in that vote, according to a lot of the histories, and a lot of Vice President Nixon's supporters asked him to fight, contest it, don't concede. But in one of his finest moments, Vice President Nixon said no. He said it would tear the country to pieces, and he conceded to Jack Kennedy and announced that he was going to support him as the next president. We have an example of a Democratic candidate for president, Vice President Al Gore, who faced a very similar dilemma. He strongly disagreed with the Supreme Court decision that lost his election bid and allowed President George W. Bush to take office. But he gave a speech of concession in late December, mid or late December of 2000, where he said, this is for the sake of the unity of us as a people and for the strength of our democracy. I also am going to concede. I'm going to support the new president. His speech is actually a pretty good model, I think, for any candidate for any office, up to and including the president, and from any party to read, particularly right now. The oath that our presidents take, it's very similar to the oath of office I took as a U.S. Marine officer and the oath I took as a White House official. It is to support and defend the Constitution. It's to protect the Constitution, to bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution. And it is a sacred oath. It's an oath that we take before our families. We take that oath before God. I think that we have an obligation to live by that oath. I do still believe that we have the most ingenious system of government on earth, despite its imperfections. I don't envy countries that don't have this system that actually allows for a predictable, peaceful transfer of government every 4 to 8 years, and it's not something that we should take for granted.
Thank you. As we heard at the start of the hearing, in the immediate aftermath of January 6th, Republican leader Kevin McCarthy understood that President Trump bore responsibility for that day and should have taken immediate action to stop the violence. He was even more candid in calls with Republican colleagues. As you'll hear in a moment, recordings of some of these calls that were later published by the New York Times. The context for these calls was that a resolution had been introduced in the House calling for Vice President Pence and the cabinet to remove President Trump from power under the 25th Amendment. Let's listen.
I've had it with this guy. What he did is unacceptable. Nobody can defend that, and nobody should defend it. The only discussion I would have with him is that I think this will pass, and it would be my recommendation we should resign. That would be my take, but I don't think he would take it, but I don't know.
But let me be very clear to all of you, and I've been very clear to the president. He bears responsibilities for his words and actions. No ifs, ands, or buts. I asked him personally today, does he hold responsibility for what happened? Does he feel bad about what happened? He told me he does have some responsibility for what happened. And he needs to acknowledge that.
President Trump has never publicly acknowledged his responsibility for the attack. The only time he apparently did so was in that private call with Kevin McCarthy. There's something else President Trump has never acknowledged: the names and the memories of the officers who died following the attack on the Capitol. We're honored to be joined tonight by police and first responders who bravely protected us on January 6th. Your character and courage give us hope that democracy can and should prevail, even in the face of a violent insurrection. We on this dais can never thank you enough for what you did to protect our democracy. On January 9th, two of President Trump's top campaign officials texted each other about the president's glaring silence on the tragic death of Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick, who succumbed to his injuries the night of January 7th. These campaign officials were Tim Murtaugh, Trump's director of communications, and one of his deputies, Matthew Walking. Their job was to convince people to vote for President Trump. So they knew his heart, his mind, and his voice as well as anyone. And they knew how he connects with his supporters. Here's what they had to say about their boss. Murtaugh said, "Also shitty not to have acknowledged the death of the Capitol police officer." Walking responded, "That's enraging to me. Everything he said about supporting law enforcement was a lie." To which Murtaugh replied, "You know what this is, of course? If he acknowledged the dead cop, he'd be implicitly faulting the mob. And he won't do that because they're his people. And he would also be close to acknowledging that what he lit at the rally got out of control. No way he acknowledges something that could ultimately be called his fault. No way." President Trump did not then and does not now have the character or courage to say to the American people what his own people know to be true. He is responsible for the attack on the Capitol on January 6th. Thank you, and I yield to the gentleman from Illinois.
Thank you, Ms. Loria. Tonight's testimony and evidence is as sobering as it is straightforward. Within minutes of stepping off the ellipse stage, Donald Trump knew about the violent attack on the Capitol. From the comfort of his dining room, he watched on TV as the attack escalated. He sent tweets that inflamed and expressed support for the desire of some to literally kill Vice President Mike Pence. For 3 hours, he refused to call off the attack. Donald Trump refused to take the urgent advice he received that day. Not from his political opponents or from the liberal media, but from his own family, his own friends, his own staff, and his own advisors. In the midst of an attack, when there was no time for politics, the people closest to Trump told him the truth. It was his supporters attacking the Capitol, and he alone could get through to them. So they pled for him to act, to place his country above himself. Still, he refused to lead and to meet the moment to honor his oath. It was only once the vice president and the members of Congress were in secure locations and the officers defending the Capitol began to turn the tide that then President Trump engaged in the political theater of telling the mob to go home. And even then, he told them all they were special and that he loved them. Whatever your politics, whatever you think about the outcome of the election, we as Americans must all agree on this. Donald Trump's conduct on January 6th was a supreme violation of his oath of office and a complete dereliction of his duty to our nation. It is a stain on our history. It is a dishonor to all those who have sacrificed and died in service of our democracy. When we present our full findings, we will recommend changes to laws and policies to guard against another January 6th. The reason that's imperative is that the forces Donald Trump ignited that day have not gone away. The militant, intolerant ideologies, the militias, the alienation and the disaffection, the weird fantasies and disinformation. They're all still out there, ready to go. That's the elephant in the room. But if January 6th has reminded us of anything, I pray it has reminded us of this. Laws are just words on paper. They mean nothing without public servants dedicated to the rule of law and who are held accountable by a public that believes oaths matter more than party tribalism or the cheap thrill of scoring political points. We, the people, must demand more of our politicians and ourselves. Oaths matter. Character matters. Truth matters. If we do not renew our faith and commitment to these principles, this great experiment of ours, our shining beacon on a hill, will not endure. I yield to the gentlewoman from Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. 𝐂𝐚𝐥𝐥. Throughout our hearings, we've provided many facts and painted a vivid picture of the events of January 6th. The violence, the human toll, both emotional and physical, including the tragic loss of life. The threats to our Constitution, the rule of law, and the danger to this nation, a nation we all love as Americans. In tonight's hearing, we've gone into great detail about the events inside the White House on January 6th. We've described how the President of the United States, who was bound by oath to the Constitution and by duty to ensure the laws are faithfully executed, took no action when the cornerstone of our democracy, a peaceful transition of power, was under attack. But it's more than that. Donald Trump summoned a violent mob and promised to lead that mob to the Capitol to compel those he thought would cave to that kind of pressure. And when he was thwarted in his effort to lead the armed uprising, he instigated the attackers to target the vice president with violence, a man who just wanted to do his constitutional duty. So in the end, this is not, as it may appear, a story of inaction in a time of crisis. But instead, it was the final action of Donald Trump's own plan to assert the will of the American people and remain in power. Not until it was clear that his effort to violently disrupt or delay the counting of the election results had failed did he send a message to his supporters in which he commiserated with their pain, and he told them affectionately to go home. That was not the message of condemnation and just punishment for those who broke the law that we expect from a president whose oath and duty is to ensure the laws are faithfully executed. But instead, it was his newest version of stand back and stand by. To me, this is personal. I first swore an oath to support and defend the Constitution against enemies foreign and domestic when I entered the U.S. Naval Academy at age 17. I spent 2 decades on ships at sea, defending our nation from known and identifiable foreign enemies who sought to do us harm. I never imagined that that enemy would come from within. I was not as prescient as Abraham Lincoln, who 23 years before the Civil War said, "If destruction be our lot, we must ourselves be its author and its finisher." Donald Trump was the author, and we the people, for ourselves and our posterity, should not let Donald Trump be the finisher. Thank you, and I yield to the Vice Chair.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Luria. I want to thank our witnesses for joining us today. The members of the Select Committee may have additional questions for today's witnesses, and we ask that you respond expeditiously in writing to those questions. Without objection, members will be permitted 10 business days to submit statements for the record, including opening remarks and additional questions from our witnesses. I'd now like to turn things to Chairman Thompson for a few closing words.
The members of the committee, and I appreciate and thank all persons who've come forward voluntarily to provide information to help protect our democracy. And our work continues. As we've made clear throughout these hearings, our investigation is going forward. We continue to receive new information every day. We are pursuing many additional witnesses for testimony. We will reconvene in September to continue laying out our findings to the American people and pushing for accountability. In the first hearing of this series, I ask the American people to consider the facts and judge for themselves. The facts are clear and unambiguous. I thank the American people for their attention over the past several weeks. I wish you all a pleasant evening.
And let me again thank our witnesses today. We've seen bravery and honor in these hearings, and Ms. Matthews and Mr. Pottinger, both of you will be remembered for that, as will Cassidy Hutchinson. She sat here alone, took the oath, and testified before millions of Americans. She knew all along that she would be attacked by President Trump and by the 50, 60, and 70-year-old men who hide themselves behind executive privilege. But like our witnesses today, she has courage, and she did it anyway. Cassidy, Sarah, and our other witnesses, including Officer Caroline Edwards, Shay Moss, and her mother, Ruby Freeman, are an inspiration to American women and to American girls. We owe a debt to all of those who have and will appear here. And that brings me to another point. This committee has shown you the testimony of dozens of Republican witnesses, those who served President Trump loyally for years. The case against Donald Trump in these hearings is not made by witnesses who were his political enemies. It is instead a series of confessions by Donald Trump's own appointees, his own friends, his own campaign officials, people who worked for him for years, and his own family. They have come forward and they have told the American people the truth. And for those of you who seem to think the evidence would be different if Republican leader McCarthy had not withdrawn his nominees from this committee, let me ask you this. Do you really think Bill Barr is such a delicate flower that he would wilt under cross-examination? Pat Cipollone, Eric Hirschman, Jeff Rosen, Richard Donahue, of course they aren't. None of our witnesses are. At one point in 2016, when he was first running for office, Donald Trump said this: "I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody, and I wouldn't lose any voters." That quote came to mind last week when audio from Trump advisor Steve Bannon surfaced from October 31st, 2020, just a few days before the presidential election. Let's listen.
And what Trump's going to do is just declare victory, right? He's going to declare victory. But that doesn't mean he's the winner. He's just going to say he's the winner. The Democrats, more of our people vote early that count. They're voting mail. And so they're going to have a natural disadvantage, and Trump's going to take advantage of it. That's our strategy. He's going to declare himself a winner. So when you wake up Wednesday morning, it's going to be a firestorm. Also, if Trump is losing by 10 or 11 o'clock at night, it's going to be even crazier. No, because he's going to sit right there and say they stole it. If Biden's winning, Trump is going to do some crazy shit.
And of course, 4 days later, President Trump declared victory when his own campaign advisors told him he had absolutely no basis to do so. What the new Steve Bannon audio demonstrates is that Donald Trump's plan to falsely claim victory in 2020, no matter what the facts actually were, was premeditated. Perhaps worse, Donald Trump believed he could convince his voters to buy it, whether he had any actual evidence of fraud or not. And this same thing continued to occur from Election Day onward until January 6th. Donald Trump was confident that he could convince his supporters the election was stolen, no matter how many lawsuits he lost, and he lost scores of them. He was told over and over again in immense detail that the election was not stolen. There was no evidence of widespread fraud. It didn't matter. Donald Trump was confident he could persuade his supporters to believe whatever he said, no matter how outlandish, and ultimately that they could be summoned to Washington to help him remain president for another term. As we showed you last week, even President Trump's legal team, led by Rudy Giuliani, knew they had no actual evidence to demonstrate the election was stolen. Again, it didn't matter. Here's the worst part. Donald Trump knows that millions of Americans who supported him would stand up and defend our nation were it threatened. They would put their lives and their freedom at stake to protect her. And he is preying on their patriotism. He is preying on their sense of justice. And on January 6th, Donald Trump turned their love of country into a weapon against our Capitol and our Constitution. He has purposely created the false impression that America is threatened by a foreign force controlling voting machines, or that a wave of tens of millions of false ballots were secretly injected into our election system, or that ballot workers have secret thumb drives and are stealing elections with them. All complete nonsense. We must remember that we cannot abandon the truth and remain a free nation. In late November of 2020, while President Trump was still pursuing lawsuits, many of us were urging him to put any genuine evidence of fraud forward in the courts and to accept the outcome of those cases. As January 6th approached, I circulated a memo to my Republican colleagues explaining why our congressional proceedings to count electoral votes could not be used to change the outcome of the election. But what I did not know at the time was that President Trump's own advisors, also Republicans, also conservatives, including his White House counsel, his Justice Department, his campaign officials, they were all telling him almost exactly the same thing I was telling my colleagues. There was no evidence of fraud or irregularities sufficient to change the election outcome. Our courts had ruled. It was over. Now we know that it didn't matter what any of us said, because Donald Trump wasn't looking for the right answer legally or the right answer factually. He was looking for a way to remain in office. Let's put that aside for a moment and focus just on what we saw today. In our hearing tonight, you saw an American president faced with a stark and unmistakable choice between right and wrong. There was no ambiguity, no nuance. Donald Trump made a purposeful choice to violate his oath of office, to ignore the ongoing violence against law enforcement, to threaten our constitutional order. There is no way to excuse that behavior. It was indefensible. And every American must consider this. Can a president who is willing to make the choices Donald Trump made during the violence of January 6th ever be trusted with any position of authority in our great nation again? In this room, in 1918, the Committee on Women's Suffrage convened to discuss and debate whether women should be granted the right to vote. This room is full of history, and we on this committee know we have a solemn obligation not to idly squander what so many Americans have fought and died for. Ronald Reagan's great ally, Margaret Thatcher, said this: "Let it never be said that the dedication of those who love freedom is less than the determination of those who would destroy it." Let me assure every one of you this: our committee understands the gravity of this moment, the consequences for our nation. We have much work yet to do, and we will see you all in September. I request those in the hearing room remain seated until the Capitol Police have escorted witnesses and members from the room. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.
All right. So, one or two things I want to cover, but before I get to anything else, she had said this, and I think this is true, that Trump wanted to remain in power. He knew he had lost. I think that's been pretty well established. I don't think there's any way you could get around that. Everyone in his own Justice Department told him that he had lost, that there was no evidence for his claims. There can be only one purpose at that point, then, to talk about going down to the Capitol. there can be only one purpose to talking about the election being rigged, and that is to overthrow what he knows is the actual results of the election. Biden had won. He was looking to overthrow the government of the United States and the let's clear that, and the duly elected president of the United States, or President-elect Joseph Biden. 18, let's see, it's Title 18, Code 2384, Seditious Conspiracy. If two or more persons in any state or territory or in any place subject to the jurisdiction of the United States conspire to overthrow, put down, or destroy by force the government of the United States or levy war against them, they shall be fined. Let's see. They shall be they'll be fined under this title or imprisoned to no more than 20 years or both. That's seditious conspiracy. So, Sandring, you've been watching this from the beginning. What are your thoughts? Do you think they made a compelling case for it or not?
For seditious conspiracy, I think they did. Granted, this isn't an adversarial condition. We don't get to see cross-examinations. You know, they get to cherry pick everything that they want to show you. But I don't doubt the general narrative of what actually happened. I don't think they're lying about the things that he did. They've got, plenty of witnesses. They've got plenty of testimony from people. They've got logs. They've got video. They've got all this stuff. So yeah, I fully agree with Ms. Cheney's closing statements.
All right. So what I'd like to do now, if anyone who wants to join us on the Discord, we cover all sorts of news and politics. We do interviews when we're covering news, when we're covering stories like this. We like to keep everything on the Discord so you can see all of our information, our sources, where we get it from. We're directed largely by the community at large. We have our discussions on our Discord, so I hope you guys will join the Discord. So, and Titan has been dropping a number of interesting links in the January 6th channel, and he's usually actually dropping links, especially if we have a discussion in the live chat and we need references. He's really quite awesome about dropping those references. So now that we've covered that, and he's also dropped the link to the Discord. So is Endring. So overall, you answered that question, but I want to make sure that you had a chance to expand on that, or just overall your impressions.
I think overall my impressions, I made a great case, and I don't doubt their case at all. I believe it. Despite it not being an adversarial, no counter, no cross-examinations, all of those, caveats that I put out there, I still don't doubt that their timeline of events and the things that actually happened and went down, for the most part, maybe a few details may not be correct, but all in all, I believe they put forward an accurate depiction of what happened. I believe they're correct. Liz Cheney's closing statements were correct. It's like he should have known. I believe that any reasonable person can say that he did know that all of his claims and accusations were not, in fact, true, and he made them anyway. I have no doubt in my mind that he was trying any harebrained idea that he could to remain in office. I'm not entirely sure of his motivation for that, whether he just couldn't accept that he had been defeated, or if it was more nefarious than that. I'm not sure exactly of his motivations for wanting to remain in power, so much so that he would go through all of these machinations. He would have the audacity to call up, state secretaries of state and say, hey, you need to find me these votes so that I can win. All of these things, putting forward the narrative that there was sufficient voter fraud to warrant a change that would have affected the outcome of the election. And, even most of his actual claims never even went to court. They never had an actual trial about a lot of the claims that he was making because there wasn't any evidence to support it. If there's any shred of evidence of voter impropriety or irregularity or fraud, it should be investigated so that we know, because we don't want that stuff to happen. Obviously, we want good, secure elections that are truthful to what the people voted for. So yeah, I'm not entirely sure that I think that he's like the Moriarty of our world, and being an evil genius that he's going to take over the world. I think that he was an incompetent buffoon and a narcissist and couldn't accept that he had lost. But that's my personal opinion, and that he went to such extremes to try and say, "Hey, I didn't lose." Do I think that they made the case that he purposely incited a violent riot or a violent attempted overthrow of the Capitol building? No, I don't think they proved that. In a court of law, would they have to exactly prove that? I don't know. Maybe they just have to prove that a reasonable person would have known that this was the obvious result of his actions, and maybe that would be sufficient to convict him. I'm not up on all of the legal stuff. But I don't think that he set out to cause the January 6th riot or insurrection at the Capitol building itself. But as soon as he found out that it was happening, I think that he was happy that it was happening. He was going, "Hey, this is awesome." So I don't know that he necessarily orchestrated the whole thing, but I certainly think that he was pleased that it was happening.
Well, and I assume you would agree that he was in fact trying to overturn the legitimate results of the election. I mean, that could really be his only, whether he intended violence or not. When he said we're going to march to the Capitol and we're going to change this, that could really be his only. However, he's intending to do it. He knew he had lost, and he was not accepting that. He was intending to overturn that.
Yes. I agree with all that. I do believe that he was trying to overturn the election. I think that he well knew, as he was told by just about everybody, that none of his claims were true. And I think that he knew that none of his claims were true. I think he knew full well that he was just pulling shit out of the air. And I think that when I suddenly forgot the guy's name. The guy that came up with the whole plan about this whole plan.
Eastman.
Uh-oh.
Oh, you there? All right. Xander, you there?
I really hate when that happens. Can you hear me now?
Yep. So, yeah, John Eastman.
Yes, that dickhead. I think when he came up with this little pet proposal for how they could maneuver themselves into winning, and I think that he latched onto that as, "Hey, that's a great idea. I think that'll work." And even though everybody was like, "Yeah, no, there's no truth to this. You really can't do this. No, that's not true." He's like, "No, but it sounds good. This is awesome. No, it'll work. This is what we're doing." So yeah, I definitely think that he actively attempted to overthrow or overturn a legitimate election.
So
the only thing I'm not sure about is being able to prove, specifically inciting the, insurrection in the Capitol building itself. Though I still think that as soon as he found out that it was happening, he was pleased that it was happening. He was actually happy. He's like, "No, this is great. This is awesome." That's why he refused to do anything.
So let me ask you this: think he's going to run again?
Yes.
Yeah, I think so too.
Here's why.
Yeah.
And I think he's going to probably announce pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And I guess from a what is the term when I'm forgetting what term I want to use. From I think that he'll announce soon, just so that he can say that this is a witch hunt intended to try and keep him from running from office again, and that's the only reason that they're possibly trying to look at prosecutions is to prevent him from running. It's a narrative that he can twist I'm not sure if he's actually smart enough to do that, but I have a feeling that he's going to, and I'm really, really hoping that he doesn't. I'm hoping to God I am wrong. To God I don't even believe in. That's how much I want him to not run again. I don't, and it's not even like I think that he's the nefarious dictator that's going to take over the country first and then try and take over the world. I think he's too incompetent for that. He's too narcissistic. He cares too much about his own press and his own voice. But the problem is that allowing him to keep doing these kinds of things leaves the door wide open for somebody who is a hell of a lot more nefarious to say, hey, these kinds of things work, these didn't, this is what he could have done better if he had just done this. I don't want any of that stuff to happen. Like, no, you did something absolutely egregious, whether you think you did or not. This is something you don't fuck around with. And that point needs to be driven home, and he just needs to go the hell away.
Well, I think
whether
you
that's
made this
prison or just into obscurity. I don't care which.
You made that point several times before, and I think it's an excellent point, which is that it's about ego for him, and I think he wants power, not because he actually enjoys wielding it. I think he just enjoys being seen as the man with the power. And famously, when they were looking for a VP candidate, Don Jr. would call up the potential VP nominees and say, how would you like to be president? Knowing full well that he really didn't want the job. He was going to decide and take the accolades and let someone else go about the business of running the country. But if you don't act when this happens, you get somebody who, and I guarantee you, there is somebody much more Machiavellian right now looking at this, learning from it, and saying, okay, here's what he did wrong. And, I fix these things and try what he did, but fix these things, I might get away with it. And as somebody who's a heck of a lot smarter, and this has to be stopped very much for those reasons.
And they did. I think it was Michael Westby. Was it him? Where the heck was it? Yeah, it was. At least accept that he's culpable, responsible. Yes, I think that he is culpable and responsible, regardless of whether he specifically set out to try and start an insurrection, a violent insurrection at the Capitol building. I still think that it is reasonable, or at least a reasonable person, could have been able to foresee some of the issues that were going to arise, and the fact that when they started arising, he did absolutely nothing. I do believe, I don't know if this is a legal issue or not, whether he could be legally held accountable for this, but I believe that he should be held accountable and culpable for the violence that happened in the Capitol building. Well, and it wouldn't have happened had he not, if he'd have just shut up the whole time, not given the speech to begin with and all that stuff, then none of this would have happened. Of course, we're getting into a but-for argument, and that's a poor argument, but I still think that he's culpable for what happened at the Capitol building, because he so easily could have stopped it.
And you end up with the problem, right? And I have this too, because I do try to apply maximum charity. And if you're applying maximum charity, that's when situations like the Mafia Don that we were talking about before, it's like, hey, that's a really nice election you had there. It'd be a shame if something happened to it. It's like, at what point is they know what they're doing, but the problem is just because, a really clever Mafia Don can threaten somebody without actually making the threat. Just because that can happen, it doesn't mean anything that can be taken as a threat was actually meant that way. The correlation doesn't go both ways, so it becomes very difficult. So it's hard for me to imagine that Trump is smart enough to be able to make those kinds of coy remarks, knowing that they're going to be. It's hard for me to believe that he's got that kind of subtlety. But
come on, he's about as subtle as a wrecking ball.
Yeah, well, exactly. So I think that's I can absolutely see and understand your skepticism, but I've started to strongly suspect that when it comes to business and when it comes to the way he does things, actually, he's very good at doing that kind of thing. And I think that's largely how he's had the success that he's had in business, despite the massive failures and fraud and other things that he's guilty of. I think one thing he is actually very good at is applying that kind of pressure and knowing how to do it. I think
very
it's
good at branding.
Yes. Yeah, that's very true, too.
I'm not talking about the fetish. I'm talking about the marketing concept of branding.
Oh, dear Lord. Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, so, all right. Well, good. So what we have at this point is they have, for now, concluded their hearings. That will, unless something big comes up, that will conclude our coverage of these hearings live. We appreciate you joining us for that. I know that you can see them anywhere, and hopefully, you learn something when you see them here, and we certainly appreciate the support for you guys watching. Like, subscribe. That really helps us out. Come join the Discord and keep up with the new things that we do and the stories coming up. I think our coverage of the assassination of 𝐒𝐚𝐽 was a very good example of what we do, and you can see more of how we cover the news by going to our Discord and by subscribing. So I hope you will do that. What we know going forward is that, and there's been complaints, we've said this before, and just to reiterate, and as Andrew pointed this out, and so again, very worth knowing and understanding. So it's not an adversarial situation per se. There wasn't pushback per se. This is an investigatory committee. They were looking into this, and these are their results. Their job is to find the truth. There are Republicans, there are Democrats on there, but mostly because the Republicans decided not to put strong Trump. They decided to boycott it, actually. The pro-Trump Republicans boycotted the committee and refused to go on it, so it's just sort of standard Republicans. Nonetheless, Trump himself has not, he's got the ability to testify, but not with a lawyer, not with somebody who's a professional who knows how to defend people in these situations. And so this isn't a court of law. Their job isn't to convict him. Their job is to get the truth, but this isn't a court of law. This isn't the actual system for convicting someone. We'll see. We do know that at this point, it looks like they're going to be making some recommendations to Garland and for prosecution. We don't know what. We are expecting that a preliminary report will be released within the next couple of months. This preliminary report will just be, these are our findings, a preliminary report on their findings. That's all these hearings really were. We don't know if there will be more hearings or not. They've kind of suggested there will be, but they haven't said it. We are expecting the final report on all of this by November. We know that they would like to have more time to do a final report. We know they don't really have that time because, at least so far, Republicans in Congress have said that if they regain the House, they will shut this down. It's over. The investigation is done. So right now, the math strongly suggests that they will, in fact, retake the House. If they do, presumably this investigation's over, so they're attempting to get everything done by then. We will obviously continue to follow with what they do, any investigations any criminal referrals that they make, and there's a lot of other stuff to cover. We'll be covering that both on the Discord and in future shows. I had been hoping tomorrow night, and I still don't know. I'm recovering. It was a marvelous vacation, but I'm jet lagged by about 6 hours, and there's a lot I need to catch up on. But I'm hoping either tomorrow. Yeah,
a river. Make us feel so much sympathy that you did a wonderful tour down the River Rhyme, or whatever river that was, and got to see all those gorgeous. I saw some of the pictures. So boo-hoo. Oh, cry me. I'm going to try and recover. It's just been so hard. Yeah, try sitting out here at 90-plus degree weather and 90% humidity with your AC broken and still showing up to a show. Then you can start crying me a river.
Okay. You know what? That's fair.
And then maybe I can sail down your river and have a fun vacation myself.
Well, to be fair, I had to go through the Schiphol airport in Amsterdam, and
that did sound pretty horrifying.
Yeah, I told you that was bad. And at least I wasn't one of the unfortunate people that was stuck outside in the 104-degree weather for 4 hours. But nonetheless, yeah. So, well, pictures of that are on the Discord as well. So if you want to see the castles and all that other good stuff, that's on the Discord. But at any rate, assuming I've been putting on the Pics and Selfies channel, I've been putting a few of the pictures up there. So my hope is that 𝐓𝐢𝐬𝐷 and I can. 𝐓𝐢𝐬𝐷 had a great idea for a topic that we've already been discussing. So we're going to do it a off time, which we haven't done in quite some time. Either tomorrow night or the night after. I think we'll try to figure out what's good for 𝐓𝐢𝐬𝐷 and I, and we'll have some, I think, really good discussions. So join us for that. We're also going to try to have on Commander McMillan. We got a few other things coming up. Yep.
I said you could at least tease a little bit about what it was that we were discussing that we thought people might be interested in.
Okay, yeah, good luck with that. I started teasing it earlier before you came on when it was just 𝐬𝐷𝐆 and I. I said, okay, this is what, and I started teasing it, and I realized I can't do it in one or two lines. I have to describe it. If you think you can give two sentences that teases a discussion on consequentialism versus originalism in the Constitution. Something along those lines, I guess. But
principalism, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So there. Okay.
And,
so maybe.
And how do you square those? And how do you square those things when consequences are in fact real, and your position based on principle could end up hurting people?
Yep. Yeah. There you go. Okay.
How do you square that?
How do you square that? I think that's going to be a really good discussion. So we'll do that on off time, either tomorrow or the next day. So we'll get that sorted. In the meantime, thank you all for joining us. Thank you for your support. I've had a new follower, Sinister Porpoise, who's been a supporter of the show for quite some time, and I personally feel very blessed for both her support and the support of so many people. So thank you all, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow or the next day and keeping up with whatever we're going to see next. Have a good night.